The hearing of the Senate Appropriations Committee will come to order. We convene today to review the special message transmitted on June 3rd by the President under the Impoundment Control Act. That message proposes to rescind $9.4 billion in previously appropriated funds, including $1.1 billion for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and $8.3 billion for foreign assistance. Testifying on this measure will be the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russ Vought. Director Vought, we thank you for being with us here today. We will also receive testimony from Senator Eric Schmitt, who introduced the rescissions legislation, as well as from a committee member, Senator Brian Schatz. The ICA was enacted in the 1970s to protect Congress's constitutional authority with regard to spending. It provides guardrails to ensure that appropriations laws are enforced, while also creating a framework for the President to work collaboratively with Congress to prevent unnecessary expenditures. Under the ICA, the President can propose rescissions, but funding can only be canceled through an act of Congress. I want to emphasize that the process provided in the ICA is neither the only nor the primary way for Congress to effectuate rescissions. This committee regularly includes rescissions in its bills. The recent year-long continuing resolution, for example, included nearly 70 rescissions totaling billions of dollars. Turning now to the June 3rd message, I look forward to learning more about the on-the-ground impact of the package, as several of the proposed rescissions do not specify which programs would be subject to reductions within the overall account. For example, the message proposes a $500 million cut to the Global Health Programs account, but it does not indicate whether life-saving programs like Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, would be affected. This amount is on top of program terminations and suspensions pursued as part of the administration's foreign assistance review and reorganization of USAID. I'm hoping that OMB will clarify the total amount of GHP, Global Health Programs funding, that has been halted. Similarly, the message does not indicate whether aid to key allies like Jordan and Egypt would be reduced as part of the $1.65 billion proposed rescission from the Economic Support Fund. The majority of the proposed rescissions to foreign assistance are from fiscal year 2025 funds. The proposed rescissions for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting are from advance appropriations provided for fiscal years 2026 and 2027. What this means is that this rescissions package, for the most part, has nothing to do with the lengthy list of questionable activities identified by the administration that were paid for with prior year funds. I certainly agree that the taxpayers of the United States should not be paying for things like promoting vegan food in Zambia. However, these and other controversial and questionable projects were the product of the misguided priorities of the Biden administration. Unless the current administration plans to continue these controversial projects that it has identified, which I very much doubt, those projects alone cannot be used to justify the proposed rescissions. I am confident that the Trump administration would not allow this kind of wasteful spending. I do want to know two areas of particular concern to me. The first is the proposed $400 million rescission of funding for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, better known as PEPFAR. Launched in 2003 by former President George W. Bush, PEPFAR has saved more than 26 million lives and enabled 7.8 million babies to be born HIV-free to mothers living with HIV. This program remains a bipartisan priority of Congress. After years of commitment and stable investment, the finish line is in sight. The United States has the tools to fulfill PEPFAR's mission and get the job done while transitioning HIV/AIDS treatment and prevention to country ownership by the year 2030. Cutting funding now, funding that is aimed at preventing disease transmission, would be extraordinarily ill-advised and short-sighted. The second area I want to highlight is the proposed elimination of advanced appropriations to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The vast majority of this funding, more than 70%, actually flows to local television and radio stations. In Maine, this funding supports everything from emergency communications in rural areas to coverage of high school basketball championships and a locally produced high school quiz show. Nationally produced television programs such as Antiques Roadshow, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood are also enjoyed by many throughout our country. I understand, however, the concern about subsidizing the national radio news programming that for years has had a discernibly partisan bent. There are, however, more targeted approaches to addressing that bias at NPR than rescinding all of the funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Before I conclude, I want to point out that this committee conducts significant bipartisan oversight on spending. It is a responsibility that we take seriously. Part of being responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars means having the information that we need to make spending decisions. Delayed budgets, missing details, and omitted spend plans make the federal budget less transparent and less accountable to the people and their elected representatives. Finally, I want to note that the spending under the jurisdiction of the Appropriations Committee, which now makes up just 27% of the federal budget, is projected to decline to about 1/5 of annual spending in coming years. I now am pleased to recognize Vice Chair Murray for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chair Collins, and thank you for your leadership in convening this very important hearing, because let's be honest, we are at a crossroads. Right now, this committee is hard at work as we round out our final budget hearings and seek to negotiate bipartisan funding bills. I am pleased with the progress we're making and hope our productive conversations result in bipartisan markups, just as we did in the previous 2 years. After Congress failed to pass full-year bills in the FY25, it is so important that we pass full-year spending bills that deliver the investments that our communities need. And this hearing today asks a very important question. Will Congress stand up and protect its constitutional power of the purse, and will this committee band together to finally say enough is enough and show bipartisanship still matters? Or will we, for the first time ever, pass an entirely partisan rescissions package and jeopardize this bipartisan work? I hate to be blunt, but that is the question that is at the heart of this first rescissions request, which would gut bipartisan investments in foreign assistance, reliable local news, and high-quality educational programming. To my colleagues, after our negotiations are done, sometimes hard-fought negotiations, and we thank each other for the bipartisan effort and tell folks back home what we secured, will we let the president then come in and rip that work to shreds? I certainly hope not, because I am truly proud of the bipartisan work that we do on this committee, and I know all of you are as well. I see how personal it is when you advocate for the research hub in your district or for the upgrades to your local military base, or I hear passionate arguments to rebuild a bridge that your communities rely on or support rural areas that are at risk of being cut off. Or I hear really thoughtful debates from this committee about how we strengthen America's role in the world, support small businesses and farmers and tribes, and respond to disasters. And when that discussion is over, we don't just fund the red states when you have the majority and the blue states when we have the majority. We prioritize programs and projects, no matter where they are, based on what members on both sides advocate for. Do I agree with every item in every spending bill? No. I don't think any member of this committee would say they do. But that is what it means to be a part of a compromise and build bipartisan bills for the good of the country. This is true of every bill we do. Each of us knows we are voting for items that are vital to our colleagues just as much as we are voting for priorities that are vital to all of us. And I have offered to the chair and others in this room to do what this committee has always done: consider bipartisan rescissions in our bills through the annual process, which is the right way to do it. But the partisan package before us today cuts to the very heart of the work we do and the very ability of this committee to do it. None of us would sit here and agree to bipartisan bills knowing their partners were just going to gut that deal with rescissions. I hope each of us thinks about that today. And I hope we will consider the genuine damage these cuts would cause as well. If President Trump and Director Vought get their way and Republicans pass this package, they will not only gut the heart of compromise that this committee is built around, but zero out longstanding bipartisan investments. They will rip away funding that supports over 1,500 local public TV and radio stations. Rural communities will be the hardest hit, not to mention our kids. There is a reason the American people support continuing these investments by a 2-to-1 margin. Local news gives people information relevant to their daily lives, what community events are coming up, how the school board is preparing for the next year, weather and market reports for our farmers, not to mention the emergency alerts when a disaster strikes. When Hurricane Helene battered North Carolina, the local public radio station was the only source of information about the latest developments for many people. Talk to any parent. They will warn you. If Republicans cuts end up canceling free, high-quality programming that is thoughtfully developed to get our kids thinking and to grow their curiosity, there is an alarming amount of low-quality junk to fill that void, content that is instead carefully engineered to keep kids watching and shorten their attention spans. Trump also wants Congress to surrender America's leadership on the world stage with drastic cuts to long-standing bipartisan foreign policy investments this committee has made. global health programs that protect Americans by stopping infectious diseases before they ever reach our shores, UN treaty obligations that don't just affect America's credibility and leadership, but also counter the Chinese government as it works to increase investments and influence. And investing in humanitarian aid and economic development pays off for our nation by promoting stability and democracy and strengthening key relationships and a lot more. We can debate the scale of our efforts, but stripping this funding out months after enacting it doesn't serve our interests, especially when Director Vought won't specify which bipartisan priorities will be cut. Perhaps the only silver lining of this package is the fact that the administration even bothered to send it and acknowledge our laws and the authority of Congress instead of flagrantly breaking the law, something it has done relentlessly under the directorship of Director Vought. But let's not kid ourselves. This vote does not represent a path back to lawful behavior when Director Vought continues to, as he says, keep all options on the table when it comes to ignoring the law. Every single one of us should be deeply alarmed by the lawless course the administration is charting here, illegally impounding hundreds of billions of dollars, ignoring provisions of our appropriations law, including pulling down the website detailing how they spend taxpayer dollars in direct defiance of the law that requires that, cherry-picking what emergency funding would be spent. And let's not forget, we have yet to get a detailed agency spend plans for this fiscal year showing how taxpayer dollars are being spent. Even now, Director Vought is advocating to cut Congress out entirely through the absurdly lawless idea of a pocket rescission. Given that track record, there is no doubt, but no benefit of the doubt the Trump administration gets for coming here. And there is no fixing this package that is a direct threat to continuing our long track record of bipartisan work and holding bipartisan markups this summer. To my colleagues, if we do not reject this rescissions package outright and seriously defend the authority of Congress and work of this committee, we will find very quickly our bills become a lot less important. And our time is consumed by more and more rescission packages to undo the work that we just wrapped up. I really worry in a time when we should be coming together to ensure the safety, economic growth, and security of this country. Instead, we will race forward with rescission package after rescission package. It will be PBS and PEPFAR that get chopped this time, maybe family planning, investments in public education, public schools next. But, you know, I think we are all proud to be on this committee, on this Appropriations Committee. This is a powerful role where we can do a lot of good for our communities, but it is not powerful just because. That power comes from our ability to work together to write bills that actually become law, and our willingness to assert our authority so those bills are enacted as intended. If we choose to ignore that, if we fail to defend that, this committee can and will lose its power, and we are getting perilously close to that line. When I first came to Congress, when I first sought and asked to join this committee for all the reasons all of you joined this committee, one of the hot button issues at that time was the line item veto. President Clinton was seeking to have it. And Chairman Byrd and this committee were organizing against it together. I was asked, should a Democratic Senate help a Democratic president rip up the bills it worked to pass? And I said no. That is not how this should work. I wanted to be on this committee to help my state, my constituents, not to weaken or surrender those responsibilities to any president. I hope my colleagues understand that is as true for me today as it was then. And if my colleagues agree, which I believe many do, then the course we need to take is clear. We have to reject this package outright and then focus squarely on the job in front of us, writing bipartisan bills for FY26. In the regular course of writing our bills, we can and we will consider whether there are targeted rescissions we can agree on, just as we always do. But we must have that conversation together. If our funding bills must be bipartisan, then our funding cuts have to be as well. Otherwise, the entire appropriations process will break down. So I am very pleased today to have this opportunity to discuss why these cuts would be harmful to our communities, but I really want all of my colleagues to fully appreciate why opening this door, even a crack, would be very harmful to this committee and to Congress as well, and what it would mean for the work we all hope to do together. Thank you.
We now turn to our first panel of witnesses. Our colleague from Missouri, Senator Schmitt, introduced the rescission legislation in response to the President's June 3rd special message. We're very happy to have you with us today, and please proceed with your testimony. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Chair Collins, Vice Chair Murray, friends and colleagues on the Appropriations Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about this administration's rescissions request. I'm pleased to join Director Vought to discuss why the Senate should urgently consider this $9.4 billion package. In early June, the President transmitted a special message triggering a 45-day review by Congress of specific appropriations made in fiscal year 2025. President Trump tasked Director Vought and his team to begin to thorough scrub of federal programs to ensure they align with the clear mandate to limit waste, fraud, and abuse. That mandate, received by all of us from voters in November of 2024, was to shrink government, to shrink Washington. And part of that means asking tough questions regarding the perceived partisan leanings of government entities that should otherwise be apolitical. These questions should be followed up with action, which is why taxpayer-funded entities such as NPR and PBS should be scrutinized. While the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is legally mandated to be non-political in nature and not, quote, contribute to or otherwise support any political party, end quote, the data shows something entirely different. Research shows that congressional Republicans faced 85% negative coverage compared to 54% positive coverage of congressional Democrats on PBS's flagship news program. And of course, there's NPR, a left-leaning news source that refused to cover the Hunter Biden laptop cover-up, simply stating that they, quote, don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories, and do not want to waste the listeners' and readers' time on stories that are just distractions, end quote. It is worth noting that Congress isn't the only payer for entities under the Corporation for Public Broadcasting umbrella. Most are largely funded and sustained by hundreds of millions of private dollars through donors, corporate sponsors, foundations, and state and local governments. Furthermore, and for those who've expressed concern, by moving forward with this rescission, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting accounts would be not touched as the chair mentioned, for fiscal year 2025. In fact, for the last 50 years, Congress has provided 2-year advanced appropriations to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to help facilitate long-term programming decisions for stations. The rescissions we're discussing for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting are not for FY25. For Corporation for Public Broadcasting, this would reduce funding for FY26 and FY27. Entities who receive funding under the Corporation for Public Broadcasting have time to readjust their budgets and plan accordingly. For foreign aid, the President's rescission package leaves intact a significant amount of funding for PEPFAR, something I'm aware that many members on this committee care deeply about. We can and should have a broader debate about our role, but for the purposes of this rescission package, these cuts are surgical and specifically preserve life-saving assistance. In fact, this program will continue to allow PEPFAR to carry out its long-established mission to provide life-saving services. What this package does cut is numerous instances of egregious examples of blatant government waste and abuse, just to name a few. $35 million to address vasectomy messaging frameworks and gender dynamics in Ethiopia. $3 million for Iraqi Sesame Street. $500,000 for electric buses in Rwanda. $800,000 for transgender people, sex workers, and their clients in sexual networks in Nepal. $4.4 million funding to recruit gender and inclusive development experts. $2.5 million for teaching young children how to make environmentally friendly reproductive health decisions. $4 million for sedentary migrants in Colombia, just to name a few. This committee, and I think this is a very important point, this committee did not line item these programs. An appropriation was sent to the State Department, and some bureaucrat violated the trust of the American people with these outrageous programs, and dare I say with this committee. Why are we investing millions of dollars in something as wasteful as recruiting gender and inclusive development experts, or $800,000 for prostitution rings in Nepal? Turning over rocks and seeing what's underneath them is exactly what Congress should be doing. Just in the last 10 years, we've seen a 40% increase in state and foreign operations funding. With such a large influx of spending, it can be easy for executive branch Democrats to get comfortable and insert U.S. tax dollars in places far beyond the scope of congressional intent. Reigning in power that the administrative state has seized is critical as we stare down a $37 trillion debt, and is critical in restoring trust in government. Just like hardworking Americans across this country make difficult decisions to balance their budgets and cut unnecessary costs, so too must their government. We owe it to the people we serve to be responsible stewards of their hard-earned tax dollars. That's why I support this rescissions package and request from President Trump. Just as Ronald Reagan once famously quipped, "No government ever voluntarily reduces itself in size." I'm proud to work with this administration, who's taking a tough look at itself and is willing to come to Congress and make reforms. As I sit before this committee, I look forward to working with all of you to examine every dollar we spend, cut what we don't need, and invest where it matters most. Because restoring fiscal responsibility isn't just good policy, it's a commitment to the future of this country. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to engage with this committee on this important legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Senator Schatz, thank you for being here also.
Thank you, Chair Collins, Vice Chair Murray, members of the committee. This is the first time I've been on this side of the dais. I have to say the altitude difference is affecting me a little bit. It really is an honor to be here to argue against this rescissions package on behalf of all of you. On behalf of all of you as appropriators. And now I want to be abundantly clear, I like Eric Schmitt a lot, but this is a very important point, and it's actually fatal to the rescissions package. Every single program that Senator Schmitt just mentioned has already been canceled. Every single program, and there's a longer list that was on a Fox News Chiron, and Senator Graham and I have kind of gone over all of this. There are a bunch of different examples of terrible sounding things. They are all done, and they all belong in the previous federal fiscal year. So now that it's Marco Rubio's State Department and Marco Rubio's USAID agency, and now that it is Donald Trump's White House, none of these things are happening. This is a rescission of Trump's CR in the current federal fiscal year. And so if you have a problem with any of those programs, let Lindsay and I write a bill that prohibits the use of funds for any of those seemingly improper uses of funds. That's the way to do this. Colleagues are being asked on this committee to cut programs that I know each one of you have personally prioritized, because we get the letters, whether you're chair or the ranker of a subcommittee, you get a letter from your colleagues saying, could you please prioritize XYZ program? And many of the programs that I'm talking about right now, in the same time period, we are receiving letters, please save this, please save that, please plus up that. That's what we're cutting right now in this rescissions package. We do not have to spend foreign assistance dollars in the same way that we always have been spending foreign assistance dollars. There's plenty of room for reform. You are pushing on an open door. And in fact, the administration has it until the end of next year. This is two-year money. There is no rush on this. This is two-year money to align this funding with its new priorities. But we're being asked to rescind billions of dollars without even knowing which programs are being canceled. Just so you understand how this legislation works, it's big baskets of money. So you have no idea whether the program that you are prioritizing is going to be cut or not, and they are not providing any clarity about that. You would think that if you're asking the Congress to use this extraordinary authority under statutory law, that you would have a line by line, here's what we're cutting, here's what we're keeping, here's what we're cutting, here's what we're keeping. The answer that we are going to receive is, let me take that under advisement and get back to you, or I don't know, that's none of your business, or I'm not sure what it is. There is no reason not to have specificity other than the math doesn't add up. The things that you care about are being cut in here, and they don't want to specify it. And that brings me to what is definitely in this package. $900 million in cuts from global health programs, including PEPFAR and efforts to combat diseases like malaria, TB, and polio. $1.3 billion in cuts to humanitarian assistance, which save lives, provide food and shelter and water, and support victims of sexual assault. And $4.6 billion in cuts to economic development assistance to key partners, whether it's Jordan with increasing regional tension, the Philippines as it counters Chinese aggression, the Burmese opposition, or Ukraine. And gone is $1 billion in support for organizations like UNICEF. Everybody that was opposed to those things that were on that Fox Chiron, everybody that found some of the things that Senator Schmitt talked about as objectionable, also hastened to say, I don't want to cut UNICEF, I don't want to cut PEPFAR, I don't want to cut the World Food Program. Guess what is in this rescissions package? All of those things are being cut, and none of the things that you object to. They've already been eliminated. This is not just a question of policy. This is also a question of what this committee is even for. Being a Senate appropriator is an honor. It means something. It means that the executive branch proposes and the legislative branch disposes. It means that we, as the Article I branch, hold the purse strings, that is subject to cloture. So what's at stake here is more than the particular provisions of the rescissions package. It is whether we're going to willingly set up a situation where bipartisan negotiations are ripped up whenever there is a trifecta. If that's what you want, I think you should vote yes. But if you want to preserve your prerogative for yourself, for your home state, and for this institution, then this is not a particularly close call. Why be an appropriator and just turn around and surrender your authority? Because it is SFOPs today, but it's going to be THUD, it's going to be AG, it's going to be Labor H, it's going to be Milcon VA, it's going to be CJS tomorrow. So I encourage all of my colleagues on a bipartisan basis to think hard about the precedent that we would be setting if we voted yes on this package. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony, Senator Schatz. I want to thank you both for taking the time to look at the rescission package and share your thoughts with us. Thank you. I now welcome Russell Vought to the witness table. Mr. Vought is the Director of the Office of Management and Budget. Director Vought previously served in the same position during the first Trump administration. Director Vought, you're welcome to make an opening statement at this time.
Thank you, Chair Collins. Chair Collins, Vice Chair Murray, thank you for having me here today.
The hearing will suspend. The hearing will suspend. I recognize that people feel passionately, but we must have order in the hearing room so that we can proceed. And if anyone else is thinking of trying to disrupt this hearing, you will be removed from the hearing room by the Capitol Police if you choose to do so. I think it's important that we allow the American people to hear from our witnesses and their senators. And I appreciate the Capitol Police for their calm and professional manner. If we could shut the door, please. Mr. Vought, please proceed.
Thank you. I'm here to testify on the administration's $9.4 billion rescissions package. This package reflects the Trump administration's steadfast commitment to cutting wasteful federal spending, antithetical to American interests, and correcting our fiscal trajectory. Over the past 5 months, members of this body and the House of Representatives have consistently requested that the administration send a rescissions package to codify the work of DOJ into law. The House of Representatives recently passed this package in full, and it is critical the Senate swiftly do the same. The rescissions package is not a new one, though it has fallen into disuse over the past 2 decades. Every president, from Gerald Ford through Bill Clinton, successfully rescinded funds. Rescissions were often bipartisan and were once a regular feature of the budget process. In fact, in the past 42 years, only 3 presidents have not proposed rescissions to Congress. Today, I sit before you as the first White House official to testify on a rescissions package in decades, if not ever, to explain the proposal and demonstrate the administration's commitment to reining in federal spending. The package the Senate will soon consider was carefully crafted with input from Congress to cut funding the American people find wholly objectionable. The proposal would rescind $1.1 billion in funding to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which has funded a politically biased public media system that has promoted radical and divisive ideologies at the American taxpayers' expense. Republicans have campaigned on cutting funding for NPR and PBS for decades, and with good reason. Many members of this body have made the case eloquently, and the leadership of NPR's own actions and testimony have left no doubt as to their agenda. There is no longer any excuse for tax dollars to subsidize these radical far-left networks. If you would like to donate to them on your own, you are more than welcome to do so as a taxpayer, but taxpayers should no longer be forced to foot the bill. The proposal would also rescind $8.3 billion in funding for the State Department, USAID, and other foreign aid that has been used to advance left-wing causes abroad to the detriment of the recipient nations and our own. It is critical that this body and the American people writ large understand that many foreign aid programs use benevolent-sounding titles to hide truly appalling activity that is not in line with American interest. For example, under the guise of so-called preventative care within PEPFAR program, Americans have been funding the following: $5.5 million to LGBTQ advocacy in Uganda, $800,000 for transgender people, sex workers, and their clients in Nepal, $3.6 for LGBTQ activism, free training in pastry cooking, psychosocial counseling, a cyber cafe, and the dance focus groups for male prostitutes in Haiti, and $1.1 million to produce Gender Transformation in Diverse Social and Behavior Change report, which advocates, again, quote, gender blindness. Most Americans would be shocked and appalled to learn that their tax dollars, money they thought was going to medical care, was actually going to far-left activism, population control, and sex workers. To be clear, no life-saving treatment will be impacted by this rescissions package. Anyone currently receiving life-saving treatment will continue to receive that treatment. In fact, over $16 billion worth of global health funding will remain after the rescission, nearly $10 billion of which is dedicated to PEPFAR alone. This will take 2 to 3 years to spend out. And of course, this is after the U.S. has provided $120 billion through this program, or over $6 billion each year since its creation. We're now up to $10 billion per year. At $37 trillion in debt, can we not pull back $400 million? Other examples of the type of spending proposed for rescissions are almost comically wasteful. For example, complex crisis funding money went to voter ID in Haiti. Development assistance funding has been used for net zero cities in Mexico, electric buses in Rwanda, and critic powder in Madagascar. Global health money went to the International Planned Parenthood Foundation and UNFPA. IECA funding went to social media mentorship in Serbia and Belarus. The Clean Technology Fund was used for wind farms in Ukraine. The list goes on. The American people didn't fund this. They didn't intend to, at least. They didn't vote to continue the Washington status quo. The entire federal government must be responsible with each taxpayer dollar that comes to Washington. The American people voted for change. President Trump stands ready to put our fiscal house back in order and put the American taxpayer first. A vote for rescissions is a vote to show that the United States Senate is serious about getting our fiscal house in order. I hope that the Senate will join us in that fight. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Director. First of all, you just gave us a list that is very similar to ones that all of us have read and that I addressed in my opening statement. These are programs that were funded in the Biden administration. There's no way that President Trump's administration would allow such wasteful and questionable spending. So I am puzzled why you would be cutting funds that the president signed in March as part of the continuing resolution, when now your appointees are there to prevent the kind of spending that most of us would find to be reprehensible and a waste of taxpayer dollars.
Thank you for the question, Senator. And I was, in listening to the opening statements, I was encouraged to hear the bipartisan outrage for some of these programs. I would add a couple points in direct response to your question, Senator. These are largely multi-year funding. There is some expiring funds with regard to fiscal year 25, but the way that this was structured was to find the waste, the abuse, the average on an annual basis for grants that get re-upped each and every year. And so we are in $37 trillion in national debt. Our view is to see, when we look at these programs, can we do it cheaper as evidence about what we find, and then to reflect that with some savings to the taxpayer. We think that we're doing that here, and that is the extent to which we don't want to just plow it into additional spending. We actually want to have it lead to a more efficient federal program in the area of PEPFAR or whatever economic development assistance that we might find. The other thing I would say is the extent to which the normal pipeline for these funds is something we're taking a close look at. I mean, we don't want to re-up the same spending to the same NGO with a different grant title. That's not success here. And so it will take some time for us to be able to find the types of groups that can dispense these funds in ways that are consistent with this administration's priorities.
Well, let me also take issue with your statement that, quote, no life-saving treatments will be impacted. When you look at PEPFAR, you are eliminating a lot of the prevention programs. And just this past week, the FDA approved a twice-yearly injection that provided significant protection against HIV infection in clinical trials. We've seen literally 26 million lives saved through a combination of prevention and treatment. We can't tell, in looking at the information that you've given us, because it's not specific, whether the rescission would harm our efforts to prevent the spread of tuberculosis or polio or malaria. Those are all programs that have been proven effective. I'm particularly concerned also about what the impact would be on the maternal and child health programs. We can't tell, but we do know that important food supplements, the ready-to-use therapeutic food that I'm showing you right here, which is peanut butter-based but greatly enriched, have saved the lives of premature babies and malnourished children. We know that these prenatal vitamins have allowed impoverished mothers in Africa to safely deliver healthy children. These are not only the right thing to do for humanitarian reasons, but they're incredible instruments of soft power. So let me ask a specific question. Does your rescissions package cut the life-saving multivitamins for pregnant mothers and the food supplement that's used for malnourished children?
No, we apportioned that funding consistent with this administration's priorities, and that funding is flowing. What we are getting at is preventative, and I do put it in air quotes. I'm not saying there's not good preventative care, and the example that you gave with regard to drugs that are being approved just this week in FDA are in another category of drugs that will largely be protected, certainly will under this rescissions bill. And again, there's $10 billion left for PEPFAR, even if this rescissions bill were to pass. What we're getting at is the extent to which we have identified in literally every program. Part of the exercise here is that all of these programs are in some respects in the dock because we have identified the extent to which all of them are funding liberal NGOs doing activities that the American people wouldn't support. And that just because they're in the PEPFAR account shouldn't make them immune for a rescission. And so when we look at preventative and we're saying in $9.3 million to advise Russian doctors on how to perform abortions and gender analysis, $4.4 in funding to recruit gender and inclusive development experts, $45 million to International Planned Parenthood Federation. This isn't, the American people, if we went to a diner and we said, what is preventative care? And we included all manner of doctors in that diner conversation. And said, what's the kind of preventative care that you would support and you think would make sense? My guesses would be in the area of the drugs that you mentioned. My guess it would also not include this kind of waste and abuse. This is actual savings to the taxpayer that we could recoup, and at the end of this rescissions package, still have $38 billion in unobligated balances, $10 billion in unobligated balances for PEPFAR.
But Director, those kinds of wasteful expenditures are not going to occur in this administration. That's my whole point. And I know for a fact that both of these products, which are made entirely in America, are being held up. This peanut butter-based supplement is in a warehouse, and there's worried by the private foundations that are contributing to the undertaking of this program that they're going to expire because they can't get the federal funding to distribute them.
Senator, the funds were apportioned. We're happy to look into. There has been a lot of news out there with regard to what is occurring. I just read this morning with regard to one of the drugs that you just mentioned. And again, we have it protected with regard to this rescissions package. And so I understand we haven't been in the business of doing rescissions packages for quite some time. We're getting those muscle memories going again. But we can work with Congress to make sure these types of things are protected on an ongoing basis. But I do believe it's important to have a reflection on the fact that if you find savings, and you know that that generally occurs on an annual grant by grant process annually, can you rescind that money in such a way that we actually get something for it? And I am worried, Senator, about the extent to which if we just have the same amount of money that's there annually, and you just say it's got to go, that you are putting massive pressure on the bureaucracy to get it out the door to the same NGOs that we are now here to deal with the extent to which they have been wasting the American people's hard-earned tax dollars, and I am concerned about that.
Senator Murray.
If you don't mind, just one point of clarification. The stuff you read, did that come from PEPFAR?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. When I cut a deal with Chair Collins or Senator Graham or any of my Republican colleagues, there may be parts of it I do not like, or they do not like, but we know what we agreed to and passed into law is something we can count on. And that is absolutely essential to getting the 60 votes to make this appropriations process work. But what we are here today talking about is one party rescinding funding provided with 60 votes with just a simple majority. And if that becomes the new normal for how this body operates, that is going to make our appropriations bills extremely hard to negotiate. So as we consider this package, this committee deserves to understand the whole picture of this administration's plans before making a decision on this request. So if this package passes, do you intend to send more rescission requests to Congress?
Senator, that's up to the president. It's certainly an option. It's an option that I've stated publicly that we will strongly consider, but that's up to the president. And it's, we will take that on a week-by-week basis. But there is more, honestly, than $9.4 billion that we've identified. There's $163 billion in fiscal year 26 that we have identified for less spending than
So these
prior
were bills
budgets.
that this committee approved on a bipartisan basis. How many packages are you talking about, and what are they?
Again, we have no decisions on those have been made, but we do want to see how successful this effort is. When I went through the confirmation process, you specifically were reminding me of the Impoundment Control Act's process to be here and to bring forth rescissions if we find waste, fraud, and abuse, and to give Congress an opportunity to vote on those, and that's what we're here to do. And,
Well,
and again, I think you're also making a point about process. From Gerald Ford to Bill Clinton, it was totally normal for the appropriations process
Correct,
to
and I
consider
will just
rescissions.
remind all of us that the Appropriations Committee worked on those in a bipartisan way. They were not partisan packages that were sent up. So what I'm hearing you answer me is that there will be more. You don't know how many more, but there will be more. So this committee and this Congress could spend a lot of time going forward on requests for cuts if this package passes. Director Vought, when asked about this request, you have said that no matter how Congress acts on this request, impoundment is still, quote, on the table. And in an acknowledgement of how unpopular your cuts to bipartisan priorities are, you even publicly said you may well try to do an end run around Congress by requesting rescissions in the last 45 days of the fiscal year, and then pretending that even if Congress fails to approve them, you can rescind those funds anyway. So let me tell you, that is not how the law works. The president does not have a line item veto, much less a retroactive line item veto. Your notion of this pocket rescission defies common sense and, by the way, the plain text of the law. Director Vought, will you commit to this committee that you will not attempt to do an end run around Congress with this so-called pocket rescission, something members on both sides of this dais have made clear is outright illegal?
Senator, there's a lot of mischaracterizations into my previous comments. I would just say that we believe that we have, under the law, numerous options with regard to how to achieve savings, including rescissions that are timed at the end of the fiscal year. General Accounting Office has articulated that earlier in the life of the
This should
Impoundment
be a
Control Act.
yes or no, and what I hear you is all kinds of word salad to make sure that you are letting us know that you intend to do things that are outside the intent of the law. And it has also been reported that you are considering sending Congress a massive deferral package under the ICA in an attempt to run out the clock and avoid legal scrutiny of this administration's illegal freeze before ultimately impounding the funds at the end of the fiscal year. Can you commit to this committee that there will be no deferral package?
We certainly are aware of the deferral provisions in the Impoundment Control Act. There are specific statutory requirements there that if we are in a situation where funds may meet those definitions, they are certainly on the table. But again, we have made no decisions. The president has not made any decisions with regard to those different tools that exist. And so I'm here to talk about one package.
I
There's been one
understand that, but
decision on one package, $9.4 billion.
Director Vought, I just want to be clear to all of us about what's going on here. You are actually telling Congress, in total disregard for Congress's Article I powers, that you and the president will just impound or rescind funds that you don't agree with on your own. And Congress, I will say to all of my committees, should not stand that from this president or any president in the future. And I think that's really important as we consider this. Quickly, Director Vought, to justify the $8.3 billion you propose in foreign assistance, you've argued that these funds were used by the Biden administration for woke programs or things not aligned to Trump priorities. That's not how this works. Whatever the Biden administration may or may not have done, most of what you are proposing, as has been talked about here, to rescind is Congress provided this administration in the FY25 CR, the same CR that President Trump signed into law in March. And while Congress has provided instructions for target countries and sectors and purposes, this administration has flexibility to determine how best to meet those bipartisan objectives. So you are waving around a tiny cherry-picked list of past initiatives funded by those accounts. It's irrelevant when the simple fact that you and this administration now determine how those funds are being provided by Congress and are specifically put to use. And yet, conveniently, you have not spelled out for this committee and the public what you plan to cut if this package passes, even if you ask us to vote on it. So will you tell us specifically, and I'm asking you two questions, tell us specifically which global health programs, malaria, TB, polio, funding for Gavi, are you going to cut?
Again, we have two main reductions in global health.
Can you tell us specifically
We have
on any of those
$500
today?
million for family planning and $400 million to PEPFAR.
But you're not going to tell us which programs. Okay. Will you tell us specifically where the Philippines, Pacific Islands, Jordan, you're planning to undermine American interests?
Of course not. We've been very clear in all of the administration's priorities that all of our commitments with regard to Jordan and Egypt are maintained. Again, we have
My
looked at
time
ways.
is out, but I assume you're unwilling to share which humanitarian crisis this administration plans to walk away with, which is what we would be voting on, and that is critical information.
Senator, there's no difference between how we've constructed the rescissions based on how you all, when you send the original bills up in terms of the allotment account. And I just would like to say this because it's my first time with the Appropriations Committee. I don't think there's a more important principle than the notion of the congressional appropriations power in ensuring that federal agencies cannot spend without an appropriation from Congress. I think that is paramount. It's linked with the Anti-Deficiency Act, which is one of the most important statutes that we are the ones that work on at OMB. And so I think that the extent to which that is understood properly for the record is something that I want to make sure I had an opportunity to say.
Thank you. Senator McConnell, and my thanks to Senator Hyde-Smith. Senator McConnell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Senator Collins. I'll start by associating myself with the comments that she made about the importance of American soft power. Interestingly enough, over my years in the Senate, the biggest supporters of soft power I've run into have been the military, generals, who are fully aware of how much more costly it is to have a war than to prevent one. And it's at a very low cost to our country, built some pretty good relationships, particularly in countries in the Middle East that certainly wouldn't be described as democratic. Reforming the way we invest in peace and stability is certainly worthwhile. And there's plenty of absolute nonsense masquerading as American aid that shouldn't receive another bit of taxpayer funding. But the administration's attempt to root it out has been unnecessarily chaotic. In critical corners of the globe, instead of creating efficiencies, you've created vacuums for adversaries like China to fill. Responsible investments in soft power prevent conflict, preserve American influence, and save countless of lives at the same time. So if we're concerned about spending, and we should be, it's important to remember what wars cost. At the height of World War II, 37% of our GDP was spent on defense. In Korea, 13%. In Vietnam, 9%. The Reagan buildup, only 6%. Obviously, peace through strength means more than just saying it. It means actually demonstrating it. So that's just a fact that soft power at very little expense goes a long way. And tellingly, some of the folks who talk most open about the importance of soft power, as I just indicated, are the military. That they know exactly what I've already said about the cost of having one. I welcome the President's intention to restore American hard power. His repeated commitments to strengthen the military signaled that he understood this, like President Reagan, that peace through strength really has to be more than a slogan. Likewise, his authorization of this weekend's strikes over the objections of isolationists who downplay the threat of nuclear Iran was another indication in the right direction. But the administration's approach to funding the Department of Defense calls into question the ability to keep those campaign promises. A continuing resolution that forces the department to meet today's requirements with yesterday's dollars, a base budget request that fails to keep pace with inflation, let alone the pacing threat of China, and a reconciliation lump sum crowded with priorities that require stable annual appropriations. Our colleague Chairman Wicker and his House counterpart had hoped that reconciliation would be a one-time injection on top of a growing base budget, not a shell game, to avoid making the sort of annual investments we begged your Democratic predecessors to make. I share this concern. We need sustained annual growth to meet the growing threats facing our country. At your confirmation hearing earlier this year, you said we have to use taxpayer dollars wisely. I couldn't agree more. I want to get the most out of every dollar the Department of Defense requires to keep America safe and advance our global interests. By providing for the common defense is our most fundamental obligation. Dividing funding for major existing bipartisan priorities between base budget and reconciliation isn't just counterintuitive, it's actually counterproductive. And asking Congress to fund a budget that defines our strategy rather than using strategy to define the budget is dangerous. So let me understand a few things. Why haven't we received the administration's analysis of the future year impacts of major reconciliation in investments like Golden Dome? How do you propose to pay for them without significant increases in future base budgets? Why has the administration taken programs with broad and longstanding bipartisan support like the Virginia-class submarines, and put them in a partisan reconciliation bill? Finally, do you even believe we need sustained growth above inflation in our defense budget? Or should we expect annual cuts from this administration like we got from the Biden administration?
Thank you, Senator, for the question, and I do appreciate acknowledging the extent to which our budget does include both the base and the reconciliation levels, and I understand there's disagreement on that front. Just from our perspective, we believe that the current appropriations process is, to some extent, broken. We're living under a CR, so no matter what level was put forward previously, it ended up with a continuing resolution in which we do not see any increases for defense spending. Similarly, there are hot-button issues that I think have kept the appropriations process, think of the wall, think of ICE programming, that have kept the appropriations process from working and almost led to the brinksmanship at the end of the fiscal year. We certainly saw that in the first term. And so our view is that we can't afford, from the country's perspective, from a national security's perspective, to trust that the appropriations process will work as we all intend and hope that it would, in that we have to use Republican votes to secure the defense increases, the homeland increases, and even things like air traffic control and some other things. So from the standpoint of what does the budget reflect, it's $1 trillion between both categories. Color of money is no different. And it will grow with inflation, which is not abnormal for the types of assumptions put in a FYDP. It is not the full FYDP. We haven't gone through our national security strategy, our national defense strategy. That is work in progress. But what we have been very clear about, and I will continue to be clear, is that when we do a fiscal year 27 budget, we will make an allocation for discretionary that could fill the gap. Right now it's in an account that gives us the strategic decision to put it in a potential second reconciliation package or to do it through the discretionary process. But we believe it is vital that we get the $1 trillion in defense spending, that we get the border funding done, and that we don't put ourselves in a situation where we either are relying on a continuing resolution or in a situation where we have to accept a massive omnibus bill that contains things the administration doesn't support. We want the appropriations process to work. I actually think that this will lead to easier time bill by bill, where you've gotten some of the hot button issues out, but we'll see. But that is our intent, and I certainly thank you for the ability to explain where we've been on it.
Senator Reed.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Collins, and I want to also thank you for mentioning the importance of therapeutic foods for children across the globe. We have a production company, Adicia, in Rhode Island, and they have witnessed stop and go, funds cut off, supplies waiting in the air warehouse, rather, while children are starving. And that's not something to take pride in, Mr. Vought. But that's been the result of your activities. I also want to make a point that my colleagues have made too. To get our appropriations through, you need 60 votes. You need a bipartisan coalition of people. And if we do that, we can't turn around and then on a partisan basis of 50 votes undercut it, because we have to maintain, for our own, I think, congressional integrity and continuity, we have to maintain what we put together in a difficult process. And I think that's a point that Senator Collins and Senator Murray have both made. And then what we see emerging, Mr. Vought, frankly, is whatever we do will be, sort of suggestive, but not controlling, as I believe the Constitution requires, because you'll have rescission packages that come up here every other week, taking out everything you want and, allowing things that you don't want to survive. So I think it's the wrong approach, and I'll make that point up front. And let me ask a very brief, and I would hope for sharp responses from you. How much are you proposing to cut from the non-defense discretionary budget in FY 2026?
$163 billion, 20% reduction, the lowest level since fiscal year 17.
And how many federal workers will be eliminated because of those cuts?
You don't have a rack up for that. It's an ongoing assessment as we figure out where we are throughout the fiscal year.
Well, I mean, published sources indicate over 100,000 people in non-defense agencies. Now, what's the budget request for OMB this year?
We have about a $120 million budget request. I think you're getting at that it's an increase, and we believe that's absolutely vital. You look at us from the standpoint of the work that we do, the extent to which the debt continues to grow, the extent to which we are putting forth recommendations and in charge of the deregulatory agenda, in the same way that we are trying to plus up Coast Guard and try to plus up ICE agents. We also believe it's important to plus up those examiners, career examiners.
Cutting to the chase, my numbers are 146 million.
I don't have it in front of me. This wasn't a
it's about a
OMB budget
13%.
appropriations, but
About a
happy to get you
13%
our
increase.
specific
So,
level.
You're here telling us we have to cut all these programs, while at the same time we have to significantly increase the budget of OMB, adding 20 full-time employees while we cut hundreds of thousands from the rest of the government. And really, from what you've been saying today, this is not about budget analysis. You haven't produced any cost-benefit analysis. You haven't talked about these programs in the sense, well, it's not working because the goal is to reduce AIDS. No, it's ideological. It's your preferences that you're imposing upon this government. And the whole essence of Congress is we come together to represent the entire American population and work it out, argue a lot, but that's the process. And it's just ironic that you're building a backroom empire in OMB as you decry that constantly in the public sphere.
I think it's a
Now,
fact.
yeah, fine. Because time is low. You are running the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, correct?
I am, but I'd like to respond to the last question in the sense that we're talking about 20 career examiners as if that is somehow going to break the bank. And in particular in your area, Senator, we had one resource management organization that covers the entirety of the Department of Defense, the entirety of state and foreign aid, the entirety of the intel community, the entirety of the Department of Veterans Affairs. That type of resource management
made your
organization
point.
needs more career examiners to be able to continue to do the job that it does. Look at General Accounting Office. I don't think they provide very much value add, to be honest with you. They are massive. They are absolutely massive. We don't want to have anywhere near that level of
Excuse me.
FTEs, but it's important
I
for us to be able to
suspect if
grow.
I asked any one of your colleagues if they needed more people to do their job, they'd say the same thing. So it's not particularly compelling. But I want to get at a point, and excuse me. You are running the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You have reduced the manpower in the Service Members Affairs Division, correct?
I am trying to. I am in
You are
judicial.
trying to, so you're putting more people in OMB, but you're taking away the people who are dedicated, in fact, the only place in the government, to protecting the finances of men and women in uniform in the United States, that everybody rolls the flag up and says they're great, they're great, they're great. But when they're taken advantage of by multiple companies, you've taken away the people that are going to fight for them.
Senator, that's actually not true. I specifically made military lending a priority in the enforcement guidance that I put out. I am trying to reduce the overall footprint of the agency. I'm in judicial receivership where I can't even cancel a contract, let alone do a reduction in force, because I have to go and litigate this in district court. We are waiting on that opinion. Hopefully that will be coming soon to see how I might be able to answer your question specifically as to the number of employees that will result in the enforcement division. But we ultimately believe that the Consumer Protection Bureau has not actually protected consumers. And I will tell you, as we have delved deep, we have found the extent to which these examiners have gone
thank
out
you.
and tried to weaponize the agencies against hardworking Americans across the country.
Well, they're trying to protect soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and space guardians.
we protect that
And you
enforcement.
don't care a bit about them.
Thank you. Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Vice Chairman, and certainly thank you for the witness that we have today. And I just want to commend the administration's work to rein in the federal spending, and I support the goals of putting this nation's fiscal house back in order. So thank you for what you're doing. While mandatory spending is the biggest contributor to our annual budget deficits and the overall national debt, discretionary spending should not be exempt from scrutiny. And we should always be examining ways to reduce unnecessary expense to American taxpayers. So I applaud your efforts and support you in that. I, too, would like to discuss the recommendation to rescind the $2.5 billion of the $3.9 billion appropriations of FY 2025 for USAID Development Assistance Account. The Development Assistance Account is intended to fund programs that help end extreme poverty, promote resilience, and support democratic societies. In practice, however, some of those funds haven't been used wisely and met their intent. They have not done that. But I want to bring to your attention an example of how development assistance funds are being put to good use. This is specific to Mississippi. The Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Fish, or Fish Innovation Lab at Mississippi State University. Mississippi raises more catfish than any state in the country. We do it well, and we've had a lot of experience doing that. Since 2018, Mississippi State's Fish Initiative Innovation Lab has advanced U.S. economy, security, and trade interests through its work to promote global food security, improve livelihoods, and strengthen the resiliency of aquatic food production in developing nations. The lab's work truly illustrates the proverb, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. This is exactly what the MSU Fish Innovation Lab is doing. Rather than giving other countries food, we are teaching them how to feed themselves through modern aquaculture practices. Mr. Director, the recessions package states that enacting the proposed USAID development assistance rescission would align remaining funds with appropriate priorities. Would you consider the Mississippi State University Fish Innovation Lab an appropriate priority?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. We will still have $5 billion nearly in this funding for priorities and programs like this, of which this will be protected. So we have no desire in this rescission package to touch that funding that seems to be so successful.
Great, and I would love to invite you and your staff down to make a trip to the lab to learn more about that great work that they are doing. And just want to invite you there, and I appreciate you working with me on this particular subject because it is money well spent and a great program.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and welcome, Director Vought. You mentioned that your pocket rescissions were misunderstood. Are you pledging us today that you will do not submit rescissions within 45 days of the end of the fiscal year?
I'm not making that commitment. I'm saying that no decision has been made with regard to any additional rescissions package or the timing of those rescissions package.
Well, colleagues, I really want to emphasize that this strategy of using delays and freezing and impoundments and slow-walking contracts and rescissions, partisan rescissions, pocket rescissions at the end of the fiscal year are all part of an unconstitutional plan to steal the power of the purse from Congress, as stated in the Constitution, and put it in the power of the President. Mr. Vought's previously told me that he strongly believes that the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 was unconstitutional. That will get to the Supreme Court. But I want to be clear, the U.S. Supreme Court has already ruled twice on the question of whether or not the power of the purse resides with Congress. And I consider this multifaceted strategy to be a huge attack on our Constitution. And I regret that you've undertaken it, as in you'd made a pledge to the Constitution, an oath to the Constitution, not to the President of the United States. I did find it concerning in your testimony that you note life-saving treatment, no life-saving treatment will be impacted by this package. Do you consider any life-saving treatment to have been halted by the January 25th 90-day freeze on AID?
We do not believe that life-saving treatment was halted through the various reviews. Certainly not the direction of policy officials. Throughout the first month, there was malicious compliance at times, and we worked through those as an administration. But that certainly was never intended to be halted.
Well, I consider that to be a huge deception that does not do justice to the truth. On January 25th, a 90-day freeze was announced halting PEPFAR. 60% of the PEPFAR staff was fired. Rubio announced that he was ending 5,200 of the 6,200 USAID programs. He then announced that 82% of USAID program was being shut down, and the remaining 18% would be transferred to the State Department. This resulted in a sudden collapse of malnutrition programs, tuberculosis programs, malaria programs, AID and HIV programs, and Boston University has put together a tracker of the impact of this sudden shutdown of these programs around the world. Let's review the child death count from the Boston University School of Public Health tracking of the impact of your shutdowns. 77,000 children have died up to today, their estimate, from pneumonia as a result of the shutdowns. 70,000 children have died from malnutrition. 59,000 have died from diarrhea. 33,000 have died from malaria. 7,000 infants have died from HIV, plus 118,000 adults. We are talking 250,000 children because of your irresponsible shutdown of programs that Congress had fully authorized and you unconstitutionally shut down in partnership with Elon Musk and the Secretary of State. How do you feel about being responsible for hundreds of thousands of children dying because of your sudden interruption in these key programs?
I reject the assertion. I'm happy to take a look at the tracker that you describe. Every administration has the ability to do a programmatic review when they come into office. In fact, that was articulated earlier by one of your colleagues, the extent to which new administrations come in with new spending priorities. That's what we were doing. There was great malicious compliance with regard to the funding halt that you're referring to.
I find your response both ignorant and callous, and the interruption of these programs was carefully detailed by Secretary Rubio. Elon Musk addressed them as well. When I asked Rubio here in the Senate about whether it was Elon Musk that drove these shutdowns, he said no. He had personally reviewed these contracts himself and his own statements about shutting down 5,200 of these programs. For you to come before this body and say that this vast shutdown of 82% of what USAID had no impact on human life just goes that you chose to make decisions totally out of sync with the Constitution. You were plenty welcome to put forward a budget for the next year. You were plenty welcome to veto any bill that we passed in the House and Senate. You could use your influence in all kinds of ways in the future, but you chose to shut down programs in the middle that have resulted in hundreds of thousands of children dying in the last few months. I find that abhorrent, and few Americans have ever had such a devastating and disasterly impact.
I would ask that members refrain from personal insults and stick to the issues. Senator Britt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to that. I want to start, though, with discussions about the rescission memo that you sent on June 3rd. It seeks to eliminate $8.3 million in foreign aid. Some of the examples that I saw in that were $5.1 million to strengthen the, quote, resiliency of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and queer global movements. $833,000 for services for transgender people, sex workers, and their clients for sexual networks in Nepal. I saw $4.6 million for social inclusion, $18 million for improving gender diversity in the Mexican street lighting industry. I could go on and on and on. Look, when Americans work hard and they send their tax dollars here to Washington, D.C., we have a responsibility to use those wisely. It is my belief that Americans have a deep desire to help people all across this globe, help people that are in need. But I don't think anyone expects us to have an ideology that has been driven into these dollars that we are trying to push all across the country, and that is exactly what this is doing. And when we look at this, the dollars that I know Americans care about are feeding hungry children, making sure that we don't have disease spread across the globe. And I have heard you and this administration say that you are committed to that. So I want to give you just a minute to respond to my colleagues' comments and also talk about what programs you're putting in place and how you're ensuring that we can still, as the chair mentioned earlier, know the importance of soft power and know that if there is a void or a vacuum left, it will be filled, but it'll be filled by people that we do not like. And so I think Americans have a deep desire to help, a deep desire to do, but absolutely no one is sending their tax dollars to move forward a liberal ideology across the globe. So can you respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I think it's a great opportunity to just articulate, and also in conjunction with Senator McConnell's question, this is not a fade on soft power. This is a fade on waste, fraud, and abuse, and it's a fade on the extent to which it's not just wasteful. It's not just wasteful to the taxpayer. It's bad foreign policy. When you're going into countries and you are putting forward the types of nonprofits that are destabilizing to those countries and those cultures, what is their opinion of the American government? What is their opinion of the American people? So we're in the midst of a foreign assistance review. It's ongoing. It's being led by Secretary of State and myself, and we're going line by line in each one of these programs to articulate where we believe soft power could be effective, where we think that investment on the front end will keep us out of long-term hard power conflicts of that nature. And I think that will be a very revealing review, and we look forward to bringing it up and sharing it at the appropriate time.
And you are committed to continuing to make sure where there is need and it is appropriate that we are working to help those across the globe.
Absolutely, yes, Senator.
Thank you so much, Director. In my few remaining minutes or seconds, so to speak, I want to take this opportunity to talk about something that is timely right now. And I would be remiss if having you in front of me we didn't talk about it, and that's work requirements. So if you're looking at the impact of work requirements on the federal budget, I believe if you're an able-bodied, working-aged American without dependents, you should be working, training, volunteering, being educated at least 20 hours a week in order to receive government benefits. I don't believe that's too much to ask. You're not taking anyone out of retirement. You're not taking anyone off of disability. You're not taking anyone out of the home. Our labor participation rate in this country is 62.4%. Alabama, unfortunately, is 5 points lower than that. Except for President Trump's first term, our labor force participation has consistently fallen since the year 2000. Director Vought, do you think it's too much to ask able-bodied, working-aged Americans without dependents at home to work 20 hours a week in order to receive government benefits?
No, absolutely not. It's, I think, a foundational principle that we should apply wherever we possibly can. We started to do this in the late 1990s with bipartisan historic welfare reform. And I think the American people probably thought at the time that we were doing it for the entirety of the federal government. We were just doing it at that time for TANF. for cash welfare benefits. But we have tried to do this in Medicaid before. In the first term, we had several regulatory proposals, and we needed statute to do it. And so it is incredible for the dignity of work to get people back in the workforce.
The dignity of work, and in my remaining few seconds, moving 4 million people, able-bodied, from welfare to work would boost the economy $149 billion. It would increase Social Security and Medicare revenues $89 billion. When you see the insolvency of Social Security and Medicare within 8 years, we know we must do something. I think the boost to the economy and the dignity that it provides individuals being part of something bigger than themselves would have a tremendous impact on this nation. Thank you.
Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, Director. Good to meet you. Thank you for being here. I'm going to try to get some clarity on numbers. In the package, you proposed to rescind $500 million from the USAID global health programs that Secretary Rubio is trying to move to the State Department. That account funds a wide range of bipartisan priorities, and so I just kind of want to walk them with you, and you can tell me the extent of the cuts. So are you cutting funding for maternal and child health and Gavi or nutrition? And if so, by how much?
Again, Senator, this account was structured to give you a reflection of the unobligated balances in those main accounts. We will have substantial global health funding at the end.
How about, so the answer is.
Family planning and it's PEPFAR.
Hold on, I don't want to.
Family planning and PEPFAR.
Yeah, I don't want to talk over each other, okay?
Sure.
TB, malaria, polio, is there a cut there? And if so, how much?
Again, those have been priorities that we have had, as you've seen in our budget. But again,
Director, it's fine if you want to say you're not going to tell me, but we don't have to launch into our talking points. I'm just trying to get a number, and it's pretty customary in front of the Appropriations Committee with the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, who is proposing to rescind dollars, for me to say, are you going to cut this? And if so, by how much? And I don't think it's actually a sufficient answer to say, we see unobligated balances and we'll either get back to you or not. So what about family planning? Are you cutting that?
yes,
How much?
$500 million.
Okay. Pandemic prevention?
Again, there are two accounts for global health, $500 million for family planning and $400 million for PEPFAR. The extent to which you want us to be specific is not a test and a standard in which you hold yourselves up to with regard to appropriations bills. You don't ask us to say, we don't ask the Congress to say we want a rack-up of every grant and recipient in every specific line item and program. We work with the allocations that you give us, and there's obviously back and forth as it pertains to the interactions between the legislative and executive branch.
Yeah,
We've given
I
you
got
the
it.
extent
I
to
got
which
it.
the
Yeah,
formal, the top-line accounts are impacted, and the main story is the
Sir, we're
extent to
limited on
which the
time.
unobligated
Could
balances
we-
are flush.
Could we please take turns? Thank you. You're proposing to rescind $1.3 billion in addition to $1.5 billion in emergency funds that you said you won't spend for humanitarian assistance. The big chunks of this are Sudan, Syria, Ukraine, and DRC, and those are roughly equal amounts that we're currently spending. Are you planning on distributing the reductions equally among those four baskets? Do you have an idea of which of these humanitarian crises are going to get less funding? Or do you consider that your prerogative to decide after we enact this rescissions package?
Again, we are looking at the flexibilities that you've given us within
Can I just,
appropriation.
do you think it's your prerogative to decide which of these to defund, or do you think it's the legislature's prerogative?
You all write appropriations bills. You have allocations that are set in those appropriations bills. We take an assessment as to what is there in terms of unobligated balances, and we make a decision as to what is necessary. But the notion, unless you've written into the law, in terms of your statutory expectations, there is great flexibility there, and much of, I think, quite frankly, the fake news this year has been the extent to which we are pursuing our flexibilities into the law to make sure that funding is aligned with our priorities.
Let me try it this way, Director. It's plainly true that you're exercising your authorities to the maximum extent of the law, and then we can have an argument about whether or not you're exceeding your statutory and constitutional authorities. But it's certainly within the prerogative of the legislative branch when considering a rescissions package to say, this thing isn't specific enough for me to vote yes. This is actually our call now. And if you're not going to give us any specificity and say, look, we've got the authority to ignore you, that's actually true. And then we've got the authority to reject this package. Thank you.
Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Vought, welcome.
Thank you.
You're on the hot seat today. This is my first time around with the appropriations process. Normally, I'm on one of the authorizing committees, which you then, the first of two in the process, you authorize and then you appropriate. And the appropriations should follow the authorizations, and that's the reason why I wanted to get on this particular committee. That and the fact that, as you noted earlier, continuing resolutions do not work. They are an effort after everything else fails. But along with that, and one of the reasons why we're having the discussion today is because coming out of the Senate, it takes 60 votes to get any appropriations process out, which means there's going to be things in this bill that neither I care for, that you wouldn't care for, but that some of my friends on the other side of the aisle do. And it is an agreement that we make. When the president signs that bill into law, it is an acceptance that they acknowledge that there's been a deal made. I also understand that you're doing this legally and correctly in asking us to look at a rescission. So you're doing it exactly the way that you're supposed to be doing this. What I want to know, and what I'd like to talk about a little bit is first of all, I've got two specifics. And then once I'm done with those, I want to talk a little bit about what the philosophy should be for this committee moving forward so that we can have this actually work and we don't end up in another continuing resolution. We actually get an agreement here and members of this committee feel as though their concerns will be met next year. So first of all, we have Native American radio stations in South Dakota. They get their funding through NPR. 90-some% of what they use, they will not continue to exist if we don't find a way to take care of their needs. It's not a large amount of money, but would you be willing to work with us to try to find a way for these places where literally they're not political in nature? These are the folks that put out the emergency notifications. They talk about community events and so forth, but they're in very, very rural areas where there simply isn't any economy to support buying advertising on these stations. Would you work with us to try to find a way in those states that have got these types of radio stations to help them survive?
Yes, Senator. I think it's an important aspect of this. Our view is that we've structured this rescission, particularly with Corporation for Public Broadcasting. It's advanced appropriation. It's not this current funding, but also to preserve other funds in other agencies that could help with this particular need.
Okay, I won't waste any more of your time or the committee's time on that. I'll just simply say I want to meet with you and let's find a way to make sure these folks
Sounds
can
good.
survive. Second of all, on PEPFAR, I do think, as Senator McConnell indicated, soft power is very, very important. I'd much rather find a way to work with a number of our countries throughout Africa in particular that really do want to work with us rather than going directly to China or other entities that are out there looking. I'm not sure that I'm satisfied that we've done a good job yet of confirming that that money's going to be there. Would you be willing to sit down with a group of us who want to find a way to make sure that that PEPFAR funding is there and that it is being directed through appropriate channels to get to where it's truly needed?
Absolutely. We're definitely want to make sure that we open up the executive branch to be able to make sure it's not halted. If there's a belief that something is halted, to show you what we mean by life-saving treatment and also what we mean and don't mean by preventative care. Because, you know, this is, I think, one of the instances of generosity on behalf of the American people, $120 billion now since the program's inception, and I think they deserve to know it's actually going to life-saving care and not these NGOs.
Well, and as you know, I do disagree with a few of the provisions that are in the proposal, but that's a part of the process. And you have done this legally, but I really do want this appropriations process to get back on track. I'd really like you to be able to share with our members on both sides here that what your belief is, that there's a recognition that it does take 60 votes to get out of the Senate, that there are going to be some issues in there that we're going to have some disagreements on, but it's better to have an appropriations process that actually works its way across rather than continuing to doing the continuing resolutions that we're suffering with right now.
Absolutely no disagreement with that, Senator. And, the fact that the president signed many bills that he wasn't wild about in the first term, specifically because that was the process. We are trying to learn from history and figure out what we can do on the mandatory side to make it not so much on this committee to solve every problem because it's a must-pass bill. And honestly, I think as an authorizer, I think you understand that. But this committee shouldn't have to carry every bill that Congress does.
Well, and I'm running out of time, but I just want to confirm one item, and that is if something is clearly authorized and it is appropriated, and it may have to be more specifically appropriated than what it has been in the past. But if that occurs, you recognize the need to get the project done. And if you can save some money, that is better yet. But you will follow the law and make sure that those programs are operated.
I think I can agree with that, Senator, in terms of how you frame the question. I mean, our view of being able to spend less than appropriation is based on efficiency, and also where the Congress or the president has clear constitutional duties, foreign affairs, and other things like that. But if you all give us a task and you think it costs $100 million, and we have the ability to do it for 80, for 200 years, presidents had the ability to spend a little bit less. And since, I believe, the 1970s, we've just pushed things out the door, and it has led to where we are. And I think I can say that we agree on that matter.
Well, I think that the chairwoman for her forbearance here, and I thank you for that, and I think that's part on us as well. So $36 trillion in debt, we got to do something to rein this in. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to associate myself with the comments just made by my colleague, Senator Daines. I'm, in fact, going to start at the same place you started in your questioning. The rescission package before us today would hurt communities that all of us have the privilege of representing. There are 120 rural public media stations that receive at least 25% of their revenue from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Members of this committee represent nearly 2/3 of these stations, including WOJB, serving northwestern Wisconsin and beyond, from the Lucoutere Reservation in Hayward, Wisconsin. My question for you, did you analyze the impact of this rescission proposal on local public radio and television stations, yes or no?
We always analyze everything, and we took.
Can you provide my office and this committee with a copy of that analysis?
I'm happy to answer any questions for the record that you might have.
I'd like to see the copy of your analysis. That's what I'm asking.
We conduct analysis all over the place. As it pertains to the questions that you might have for the record, I'm happy to respond to them.
Very good. Congress spends months negotiating appropriations bills so that they can and almost always do garner overwhelming bipartisan support. I was so proud on this committee to see our committee send most of our subcommittee bills out with near unanimous endorsement. And so the committee comes together in a bipartisan manner to invest in our nation's most valuable asset, our people. We put the people we represent ahead of partisan politics and invest in our nation's economic development, public health, and national security. Passing partisan rescission packages to undo bipartisan appropriation bills will fundamentally change the work of this committee and Congress. We write these bills to invest in programs that we, the elected representatives of our state, know are important for our communities. Like any bipartisan agreement, there's always things that I don't like and things in it that my Republican colleagues don't like. But regardless of who is in the majority, we can't negotiate bipartisan deals if the majority walks back on those agreements months later. That is precisely why rescission proposals like this haven't been enacted in recent history. If there are changes to be made to appropriated funding, the levels of funding or what it is spent on, those should be made through the appropriation process. That is why this committee exists. So Director Vought, you have said that OMB could send up multiple rescissions packages or just outright impound funds. Right now, the Department of Labor is not committed to spending fiscal year 2024 funding for 2024 funding for congressionally directed spending projects as a June 30th deadline quickly approaches. Would congressionally directed spending projects be eligible for a rescission proposal under the Impoundment Control Act?
Senator, thanks for the question. We are aware of those funds. We are not there yet, and they have a unique fiscal year, the end of June.
Yes.
We are under a programmatic review. We still have time to obligate those funds.
There are
And
129.
we are looking very carefully
Fine.
at those programs to make sure that they are consistent with the president's priorities.
These are congressionally directed spending requests from members of this committee on a bipartisan basis that this committee approved. That money needs to be
We're certainly aware
allocated.
of the funding at issue.
So right now, the Department of Education is not committed to spending appropriated funding for formula grant programs that should be allocated to states and school districts in the coming days. That is leaving schools completely in the dark about how much funding they will have for the school year that starts in 2 months. Would funding for the Department of Education formula grants for before and after school programs or funding directly supporting teachers and educators be eligible for the next rescissions proposal?
We are considering multi-year funding, and it is underway with a programmatic review. But again, it is multi-year funding, and no decision has been made with regard to whether they will be a part of any particular rescissions package. We are aware of the extent to which we are reviewing those funds.
Madam Chair, I have more questions, but I note that my time has expired. I will submit them for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kennedy.
Mr. Director, I want to apologize for the protesters, but I can assure you that under congressional rules and the laws in the District of Columbia, they will be promptly punished and put on double secret probation. You'll probably see them back again today. I think the president's demonstrated that he understands that what you allow is what will continue. We seem to have a problem with that concept. I listened to some of my colleagues accuse you of doing everything but abandoning your children to wolves. They accuse you of undermining the sanctity and integrity of the appropriations process. And I'm sitting here thinking, what sanctity? What integrity? What appropriations process? I'm proud to serve on this committee. I watched this committee last year. We passed 11 out of 12 minibuses. Sent them to, and we all choked down some stuff you wouldn't believe. And we sent them to Senator Schumer, my friend. He refused to bring the bills to the floor of the Senate. Now, that's when he was in the majority. You really think he's going to allow us to vote on a budget when the politics have changed and his politics? If you do, you're Willie Nelson high. You're smoking some of the best dope God ever put breath in. What appropriations process? All we've got left are CRs and rescission packages. And President Trump's not the first president to ever send a rescission package, is he?
No, sir.
A bunch of presidents have, haven't they? And did civilization melt?
They did not.
No, they didn't. Now, you want to know how we got $36 trillion in debt? Just listen to this. Let me tell you what it's like, a majority, and not everybody. A majority of this body, oh, they're all for cutting spending porn. They're all for going to heaven, but they're not ready to make the trip. That's how we got to $36 trillion. This stuff about PEPFAR, oh my God, you're going to destroy the world. Now, there's a part of PEPFAR that deals with money for life-saving care, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And there's a part of PEPFAR that you look at it and you want to say, pass me the sick bucket, isn't there?
Yes, sir.
And you're getting rid of the sick bucket stuff.
Yes, sir.
You're getting rid of $5.5 million to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex advocacy in Uganda, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
I can't believe we're arguing about this. I can't believe we're arguing about this. PEPFAR, we're not denying life-saving care to anybody, are we?
No, and $10 billion would remain for that funding.
And a couple of my colleagues have made the point, well, this was President Biden. President Biden ate my homework. And these programs have already expired. Some of these are multi-year programs, aren't there?
Yes, multi-year grants.
Let's talk about public broadcasting. Now let's cut to the chase. Public broadcasting in America today is political as hell. We all know that. You don't have to be a senior at Caltech to see it. Some folks like their politics, so they want to give them money. Some folks don't like their politics, and they don't want to take it away. But that's not the real principle, is it, Mr. Director?
No, sir.
The real principle is, why do we give money to CNN?
No.
Do we give money to Fox?
No.
Do we give money to Politico?
No.
Then why are we giving money to public broadcasting? Why? We're $36 trillion in the hole. I hope you send us more rescission packages. It's the only way we're going to get anything done. I'm embarrassed to say that, but I've seen this movie before, and this appropriations process is broken. And finally, somebody is trying to give us a chance to cut the spending porn. And we're sitting here fighting about it? The American people are going, what planet did all you people just parachute in from? I'm done, Madam Chair.
Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I get to my questions, I want to just try to address some of my colleagues, because if there's one thing I've learned about this place, it's that whatever foot the shoe is on today, it's going to be on the other foot in a few years. And you can imagine if we go down the road of this body being purely advisory and having a very different president in the White House in a few years, and maybe a different House and a different Senate, what that's going to mean for a number of red states. Because if you care about defense appropes, you know, what happens when we have a president who decides that Air Force base in Missouri shouldn't get the funding we appropriated for it, or the Army base in Arkansas, or the highway in Alabama, or the National Park Unit in Alaska. And so we just have to think through this and make sure that we're still relevant here. And I want to address one of the fundamental disconnects, because it's not just talking points. The chair held up this RUTF. That's something we've actually been able to work on a very bipartisan basis. Director, how familiar are you with RUTF, what it's used for?
I'm familiar to be able to come here knowing it would be addressed.
It's something you use when kids are so severely malnourished that they need to eat this before they can eat other food. They can't eat rice. They can't eat normal food. And so when I hear that none of the life-saving stuff has changed. I'm trying to square the fact that I and a number of other colleagues were at a refugee camp in northwest Kenya where the funding got cut off. It got cut off for rice, it got cut off for this kind of stuff, and now mothers are on a 600-calorie-a-day diet. That's slow starvation. So if that's not what this administration means to do, then you need to get together with Secretary Rubio and fix it. Because I saw kids that, you know, when they get malaria, when they get dysentery, they can't eat food anymore. And if we're not doing this, and notice it has an American flag on it, that is smart soft power. Because we have allies like Kenya who are the last bastion of defense against the lawless terrorism that occurs further north. I mean, that's why there's a refugee camp there, is because of the South Sudanese war, not to mention the terrorism that tries to move into Central Africa from the east. It is a smart investment so that we don't have to send troops. And we are not meeting that obligation right now. And that has life and death consequences. So it's one thing to talk about somebody's report. It's another to have to look at mothers and kids who are slowly starving. Director, you impounded USAID funds to Colombia.
No, sir, we did not.
You did not?
We have not impounded any funding.
I'll get back to that. If I misspoke, then otherwise I'll just put the communication in writing. I want to return once again to this issue of public broadcasting, because there are a number of places where there is no CNN, there is no Fox, there's no nothing for emergency broadcasting except for public broadcasting. Alaska has the most stations that receive over 25% of their funding from NPR, but New Mexico is the second most. What do you say to communities like Zuni, New Mexico, or Raymond, New Mexico, tribal communities that simply don't have any other form of emergency broadcast backup, where you're not replacing, you know, the for-profit radio station down the street? You're just telling people that when there's a wildfire, you're not going to have emergency information. And how did you rack and stack that
Thanks for the
approach?
question. Those important stations would not go away. I heard the number 25%, I think, from the senator from Wisconsin. Our number is about 17% in terms of the revenues that they rely on CBP for. There is ample time for them to adjust, but even the funds that they receive, they then send back to Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or specifically NPR and PBS, for programming. So our view is that they should be more judicious with where they are paying for content, and that is no longer a need. Similarly, we protect other government programs in which important information, emergency information, weather, is getting put out to the public via these stations. So our view is that we specifically did not rescind fiscal year 25 funding. This is about 26 and 27 advanced appropriations. We have not created a cliff. We have given an opportunity to work through these things and allow them to plan accordingly so that they can continue to serve the communities that you represent and that they serve.
Chair Collins, I hope we'll take extra time to make sure that those committees have what they need, communities have what they need.
I would note to my colleagues that a vote has begun. I'm going to call on Senator Haggerty is next, and I am going to try to race over and vote. I am going to ask unanimous consent that statements from the George W. Bush Institute and Bill Gates be put into the record without objection.
Thank you. Director Vought, welcome.
Thank you.
As we've heard today, rescissions are a long-standing feature of the appropriations process. and that this committee routinely includes rescissions in its annual funding bills, correct?
Yes, Senator.
For example, the most recent appropriations bill enacted by this committee included 162 rescissions totaling over $60 billion in previously appropriated funding. That's over 6 times the amount proposed in the rescission request that we're reviewing today. To be clear, the rescissions request we're debating today is straightforward, it's simple, and the examples that you provided underscore a gross misuse of taxpayer funding. Now I want to turn to a different issue. It's one that's crucial to America's long-term competitiveness, in my view. If we want our nation to remain a global hub for innovation and for economic growth, we must ensure that our research institutions have the ability to compete on the international stage, and that starts with examining how we fund these research institutions. It's important to recognize that life-saving biomedical research can, if properly managed, be a key driver of our nation's strategic advantage in science and technology. I'm fully supportive, as I know this administration is, in ensuring that every dollar entrusted to us by the taxpayer is used efficiently, especially when it comes to research on these activities. We must ensure that these valuable funds are focused on advancing scientific research and not wasted on administrative expenses. One particular area that has received considerable attention is the use of grant funding for so-called indirect costs and overhead. I'm a businessman. It wouldn't be the first time that I've seen all kinds of costs classified as, quote, indirect cost. However, when we take a closer look at what is being defined as indirect cost, in this circumstance, it can often include expenses like personnel, like hazardous waste disposal, secure data storage. In many cases, these costs aren't unrelated luxuries. They may well be essential to our ability to conduct safe and high-quality research that gives America a competitive advantage against the world. So, Director Vought, my question is this. As the administration looks at ways to make sure taxpayer funds are efficiently and effectively used on research and not on bloated overhead, do you believe there's room to work with Congress, and with this committee in particular, to make sure we get it right when it comes to accounting for activities that are mission-critical to research and those that are truly wasteful or overly bureaucratic in a way that provides transparency to the public, to the Congress, and to OMB, and to do so without stifling American innovation?
Absolutely, Senator, and I appreciate the question. I know this is a priority for both you and the chair. Much of my time right now is being spent with university presidents, chancellors of systems, to get a handle on the extent to which, and quite frankly, they have come forward and said, look, we know there's an issue. We can't continue to receive 40 to 50% for indirect cost rates when Bill Gates pays out 10% from the Gates Foundation. So we are working through a guidance on that, and we'll continue our work, and we'll do it in close collaboration with this committee and you.
Thank you, Director Vought. I must say I've had a number of those conversations. I doubt as many as you have. But in those conversations, what I've also found is that the federal government imposes certain requirements on research institutions, reporting requirements, compliance requirements that they can't even explain, nor do they understand the logic behind them. Many of them are redundant, overlapping, or just a royal pain in the you-know-what. And so I applaud any effort that we might also undertake to try to streamline those costs, to try to make this as efficient and effective as we possibly can. So I'm a firm believer that the federal government can learn a great deal from the private sector when it comes to efficiency, when it comes to return on investment, and streamlining is one of those opportunities as well. And I still believe that there are inefficiencies in our research enterprises, don't get me wrong. But I also believe that we must have accurate and transparent accounting so that we can appropriately balance our shared goals of physical discipline and life-saving research. Thank you very much, Director Vought.
Thank you.
I think it's me. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I'll just be honest with you. I understand the rescission process and what we're trying to do. And you gave some examples of, like the $20 million for Sesame Street in Iraq and all that bad stuff. As I understand it, that's not really what we're talking about. The things that you read about PEPFAR spending, could you go over that some of the crazy stuff?
Sure. $333,000 for LGBTQ advocacy in Uganda, $530,000 for Lesbian Justice Foundation, $9.3 million to advise Russian doctors on how to perform abortions and gender analysis.
And that was under, that used PEPFAR money.
PEPFAR.
Okay, so to my colleagues over here who are upset, you ought to sit in my shoes. I have been supporting this program as hard as I know how to support it, in good faith, believing that preventing mother-to-child AIDS transmission is not only good human policy, it's good national security. It's the right thing to do. It's good soft power. And now I have to listen to this. And to those like Samantha Power, you're the one that got rid of USAID. And the people who are running PEPFAR, to let that amount of money, I mean, that's millions of dollars, right?
Yes, sir.
To go to that junk. We have common ground on protecting children and mothers from passing on to their child AIDS. We have common ground on keeping people alive who have been infected with AIDS. And to my Democratic colleagues, there is a consequence to this crap. $400 million, first thing I thought about, wow, how is PEPFAR fraud, waste, and abuse? Well, I had no idea there was $1 spent like this. So you opened my eyes. Now, I just want to tell the committee this. I believe in PEPFAR as much as I've ever believed in it. I think it is a vital program that saved millions of lives. But to those who've run this program and allowed this to happen, you clearly don't appreciate it as much as I do. You clearly care more about your political agenda than the actual goal that the American people signed up to with President Bush. Don't you think President Trump likes the idea of PEPFAR, helping people stay alive who've been infected with AIDS?
A paramount principle with this program, Senator, and you've probably had conversations with him about it, is he wants to preserve the life-saving treatment.
He is so all in on this. But what you don't know is he's talked to Bill Gates a couple of times about a vaccine for AIDS. He would like President Trump to spend some time and effort and money on finding a vaccine, which would be a blessing. So it's not a Trump problem here. I know him pretty well. And to my Democratic colleagues, when you're in charge of these programs, or people in the administration are in charge of these programs, and this happens, you make it so much harder on the rest of us. And what you found in PEPFAR just astonishes me, that money would be spent that way. I've traveled the entire continent of Africa and other places with bipartisan delegations celebrating the lives that PEPFAR has saved, the children that are alive today, because the generosity of American people. And to hear that $9 million for what? For abortion?
To perform abortion and gender analysis in the...
Are you sure about that?
Yes, Senator.
Wow. I don't hear any more crap about us from y'all. None. This happened on your watch. No more preaching to me. I'm going to vote for this package. You know why I'm going to vote for it? Just as a statement that PEPFAR is important, but it's not beyond scrutiny. That the way you run the government has consequences. Don't lecture me about being mean or cruel. If you really give a damn, people in charge of this program, they wouldn't have let this happen. We wouldn't spend $9 million helping doctors in Russia perform abortions. What else was on the list?
4.4 in funding to recruit gender and inclusive development experts. $35 million to address vasectomy messaging.
That's just a bunch of bullshit. You've taken a program that really has saved people's lives, and you let people run it her nuts. Well, there's a cost to that. So I'll continue to support PEPFAR, but I'm not going to support this stuff. I'll continue to try to work with President Trump to find a vaccine for AIDS. I'll continue to show people throughout the developing world we care about them. But I will not continue to bless this kind of stuff. Thank you for what you've done.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Senator. Welcome, Director Vought. In response to a question that Senator Murray asked earlier about pocket rescissions, you cited a 1975 statement by GAO in the aftermath of a rescissions package that was advanced by President Ford. I think it's important to point out for the record that in the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision in Clinton versus New York, which, as you know, was a line item veto case, where the court said, quote, "There's no provision in the Constitution that authorizes the president to enact, amend, or repeal statutes," unquote. The GAO found that in the absence of congressional action, a rescission proposal would remain just that, a proposal. And that's why GAO later revised its view subsequent to that Supreme Court
Can I speak
decision.
to that, Senator?
I got to go on, Mr. Vought. If there's extra time and I'm granted it, I'd be happy to have you respond. Would you agree that federal agencies are required to follow the law, including the appropriations law, as Senator Collins referenced?
Yes, I also believe that the president has the ability to run every program as efficiently as possible. And what's interesting about what GAO has said, GAO has changed its view with regard to pocket rescissions. They change their view every administration. What Congress did not do in the aftermath of the legislative veto being struck down is they did not, in fact, change the Impoundment Control Act. Congress has never, knowing this was an issue, has never changed the law.
Mr. Vought, as I said at the end of my time, if you're given additional time by my colleagues, I'm happy to have you expound on that. But I think what GAO was saying was that the Supreme Court decision in the language I quoted essentially filled the gap in the Impoundment Control Act by making that clear separation of powers argument. But my question was whether or not you federal agencies had to comply with appropriation bills. And one of those provisions is something that I authored that requires OMB to show the American people, American taxpayers, how we are spending their money by requiring OMB to publish the apportionment documents. This is not an optional provision. The system was operating for 3 years. The language is clear. It says OMB shall operate the system, not may, not when it feels like. So, Mr. Vought, why did you terminate the system given the fact that this is the law of the land?
The administration thinks it's unconstitutional, that it gets to the deliberative process and pre-decisional information, the extent to which when a president using his tools at OMB is managing taxpayer money, and many of these are not final agency decisions, the extent to which that is being forced to be reported on a website, our administration believes that that's unconstitutional.
Oh, do you have a legal opinion expressing that
We
view?
certainly have transmitted from the Department of Justice the views as it pertains to this. Our general counsel has articulated our grounds for this opinion.
Mr. Vought, I think given the fact that it's a congressional provision that was put in there by law, it was also enacted, signed by previous presidents, it is the law of the land. I have not seen any memo from the administration declaring it unconstitutional or the grounds for it being unconstitutional. So I welcome providing that. I want to get to another issue regarding the GAO, because as you know, they found that the administration was illegally impounding funds from 2 accounts, and that there are 36 ongoing investigations about other withholdings. I've heard what you had to say about GAO. And I'm not going to ask you to repeat your views about GAO, but what I want to know is whether or not you plan to spend the dollars that were appropriated for the state electric vehicle infrastructure deployment plans and the Institute of Museum and Library Services programs. Simple question. Are you planning to spend those monies as required?
You know, it's interesting thing about GAO is they never had an issue with regard to President Biden not withholding funds with regard to the border
Mr.
wall.
Vought, I just
They
asked
changed
you a
their
question.
position constantly.
Are you planning to spend the funds?
We're going
that
through a programmatic review. We will look at our options under the law with regard to that funding. Each set of funding is different, as you know, and we will be continuing to evaluate that program. the GAO is improperly calling programmatic review impoundments. They've now done it, I believe, two times. I expect them to do it many more times, and it will not
That
change
is
the
why
reality that these are not impoundments.
That's why you're answering a different question, right? I didn't ask you to comment on the GAO rationale. I happen to agree with their rationale. You disagree. I asked you a much more simple question. When do you plan to spend these funds? Do you plan to spend these funds before the end of the fiscal year?
Your question, the GAO statement was the predicate for the question. I didn't feel like I can answer the question without dealing with the predicate.
I'm just going to ask you a straight question with no predicate. Do you intend to spend the monies that were appropriated by the Congress for these two programs?
We are considering the programmatic aspects of that program. We know that we have options under the law, including a potential rescissions bill. We have a lot of different things that we can look forward to with regard to how we might approach those fundings, various statutory ideas, and we will take a look at all of the tools that are on the table for the purposes of those funds. But we're not ready here to say that we are done with our programmatic review, and GAO, quite frankly, is improper to continue to call it an impoundment.
Well, we have a difference of opinion on that, but my question again was this issue about spending the money. And Madam Chair, I appreciate that, and I'm going to follow up with you directly because I know you asked questions about whether or not the administration was required to apply appropriations law, which I think we both agree it is, and we obviously have a difference of opinion here. So I look forward to following up with you.
Thank you. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Administrator Vought, thank you for being here today to answer our questions, whether it's on the specifics of this rescission package to where this all might be headed with the Impoundment Control Act. I think probably to a number, every one of us is supportive of PEPFAR and the intent of that program. I think we all recognize that most of everything we do around here isn't entirely perfect, and we try to do as good as we can and improve it every single opportunity that we have. I'm going to ask you some questions with regards to Corporation for Public Broadcasting, but just kind of from a more general perspective, it's absolutely the administration's right to send us rescissions. It's our right as a Congress to then figure out whether or not we're going to support them. But I am going to strongly push back against my colleague here on this side of the aisle, Senator Kennedy, in his comments, basically saying that all we have anymore when it comes to appropriations are CRs, which are a miserable option, and rescissions. I refuse that. I reject that. And I think that not only we as appropriators on this committee should reject that, but we as members of the Senate, members of the Congress, should reject that. It's pretty clear in Article 1 what it is that we're supposed to be doing when it comes to the power of the purse, appropriations. We have a responsibility, and Administrator, you have aptly pointed out that maybe in some of these areas we have failed because I think many of the initiatives that you have specifically cited to our constituents would probably say that's not what was intended. But this is our role here in the Congress and as appropriators to again assert our role and our responsibility. I don't object to the fact that you have come to this hearing today to present your review. That's absolutely fair and legitimate. But I want us as senators, I want us as members of the legislative branch to make sure that we are being faithful and have fidelity to our requirements under the Constitution as well. So I want to ask about public broadcasting in the time that I have here. You have said that, and it's more specific to NPR, I think, but you said that basically it's all political. I am going to give you a little bit of a bird's eye view of what I consider to be not political when it comes to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. and the role that they play in my state. I've got kind of a memo here from Coast Alaska, which is our Alaska Public Media, outlining the various public media stations around the state of Alaska. I'd like the permission that they be included as part of the record.
Without objection.
But there's 22 different stations that are listed here, and they're everywhere from 24% of their annual budget to 70% in Sandpoint, in communities that are relatively small but have extraordinary reach. In Barrow, the station up there covers some 95,000 miles. When the fiber optic cable was severed by ice about 6 or 7 months ago, that has still not been repaired. It's public broadcasting that is beaming out to the 8 communities out there to keep those people connected. Right now, we've got wildfires that are raging in the interior part of the state, and so at Fort Yukon and McGrath, it is just our public radio stations that are providing the updates to get people into safe areas. Senator Rounds mentioned the very important role that we see with regards to our tribes. We have more than 60 tribal stations that is served out of KNBA that would be disproportionately impacted, where they offer emergency alerts, vital community connections. So I'm going through their concerns, because almost to a number, they're saying that they will go under if public broadcasting funds are no longer available to them. And you've indicated that, well, they're going to have time to readjust their budget, because it's not going to be this fiscal year, that's going to be impacted. When you have a community like Sandpoint out in the Aleutian Islands, where 70% of their budget comes from public broadcasting, or in let's just say Wrangell, because I'm going to be going there in a few days, 50% of their budget comes from public broadcasting. There's no way to recalibrate. There is no safety valve for them. So, Administrator, I've run out of time to ask my question, but I hope you feel the urgency that I'm trying to express on behalf of the people in rural Alaska, and I think in many parts of rural America, where this is their lifeline. This is where they get the updates on that landslide. This is where they get the updates on the wildfires that are coming their way. And so how they will be able to not only get the emergency alerts that they need, but also the weather reporting to make sure that that fisherman out in Unalaska can go out safely, so that these communities can be connected when the deadly landslide has come through. I know Senator Rounds has asked for specific help with regards to the tribes, but mine is much bigger, and I think we're not necessarily alone. We're just a little more extreme in the ask.
Senator, thanks for the comment, and we'll definitely work with you throughout the process if it's not in the fiscal year 26. I think we're to the point, for decades, we've had concerns with the extent to which public broadcasting was funding content that was run contrary to the American people, and we've got to get to the point where we can finally deal with that. And we believe we put forward a proposal that gives a run rate to be able to deal with that, but I certainly want to work with you throughout the various opportunities that we have moving forward.
Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vought, during your confirmation process before the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, where I'm the ranking member, you testified, and this is quote, "I will always commit to upholding the law." Yet in January, you refused to commit to following the Impoundment Control Act, and now OMB is leading an unprecedented and a brazen campaign of illegal activity as you break the law and you refuse to spend congressionally passed appropriations, robbing American communities of the resources that they need. And I want to pick up Senator Murkowski's point on public broadcasting and kind of reiterate what I'm seeing in Michigan as well. You've heard the impact that it's going to have on Alaska, and your rescissions package cuts to public broadcasting won't just hurt communities' access to local news and education, but as you heard, it's going to cut critical funds for Rural television and radio stations like WNMU in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, WKAR in Lansing, and more, that provide emergency alert services during disasters and public safety situations. They're often the only folks that do that, particularly in rural America. Earlier this year, WCMU out of Mount Pleasant, Michigan, saved lives when it stepped up to coordinate emergency information during a catastrophic ice storm in Michigan. When commercial towers went down, this is not a luxury, but it's a fundamental public responsibility. Public broadcasters are the backbone of emergency alerting, but I've heard from Michigan broadcasters, especially those in rural areas, that they may not survive if these cuts go through. That could mean no emergency alerts for over 250,000 residents in the Upper Peninsula alone, not to mention the thousands more in northern Michigan, mid-Michigan, or the Thumb. So Director Vought, I just need a yes or no answer to this question. Were you fully aware of the emergency alert function that public broadcasters play when recommending eliminating these funds in the rescissions package?
Senator, certainly aware of the extent to which public broadcasting has an impact on these communities, and it's our view is that to the extent that it's been politicized, we have a real problem in this country. You said something earlier in which you said was misstated. We did not impound funds in January. We have not impounded funds yet. It certainly wasn't as a result of the malicious compliance that was conducted with regard to the freeze memo that you were referring to. So I think it's important that the record reflect that.
Well, we're seeing, Mr. Vought, thank you. We're seeing you're holding funds. You're holding funds that have been appropriated by Congress. That's not going out. Communities and others are being hurt.
We're conducting a programmatic
answer
review.
the emergency. I would like you to answer the question that I asked. Are you aware about the emergency alert function and how critical that is in rural America? Is that
Certainly
something?
aware of the extent to which public broadcasting performs a host of different purposes, and we continue to have
Specifically
major
emergency broadcasting.
and
Do
we
you know that?
continue to maintain funding for other programs, one of them which includes a FEMA for this type of work and this type of
So you know
service.
FEMA can't do it all. That's where it's pretty clear what's happening here. So how are you going to fill the budget backholes? How are these people going to be able to get that information? Do you have a plan for that?
We believe that we have put forward a very reasonable proposal. We've maintained the fiscal year 25 funds that are already obligated to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Maybe they should get a sense for the degree to which Congress and the President is moving against that funding and not fund as much NPR and PBS. The
They're gonna
political
go down.
program
What I'm
that
hearing
is
from my folks,
underway,
these
in which
stations
we
here-
are saying, here, Senator,
No,
in
but-
2022, NPR ran a feature titled,
No,
What
I don't-
Queer
that's
Ducks
not
Can
the
Teach
question. Mr.
Teenagers
Vought,
About
that's not the
Sexuality in the Animal
That's
Kingdom.
not the question, Mr. Vought.
In
I have another
2020,
question for you.
PBS show
Mr.
Sesame
Vought,
Street partnered
Mr.
with
Vought,
CNN for a town hall aimed at
Vought,
preventing racism and the Black
Mr.
Lives
Vought, could
Matter
you
riots.
show a little bit of respect here?
I'm happy to, but
and I'm
you
asking
continue to
a
misstate
question.
things and
I
ask
don't
the same
need you to
question.
answer questions that I'm not asking. Please. I'm trying to be as civil as I can, and that's who I am. But I don't expect to have a witness that behaves as you do. It's really disrespectful. But it's certainly understandable
You
given
misstated
the
the
types
facts,
of
Senator.
activities. I have another question for you. The Impoundment Control Act only permits the president to refuse to spend the funds proposed for rescission for up to 45 days. If Congress does not approve a rescission package, the president then must release the funds to be spent on these critical projects. So my question for you, sir, and this is the question I'd like to have answered, do you commit that if Congress does not pass a rescission bill to cancel these funds, that the administration will then release them so that they can be spent?
Yes, if Congress does not pass this $9.4 billion rescission, we will release the funds for this multi-year package.
Very good. Thank you, Madam President. Or Madam Chair.
Senator Fisher, who has been the most patient member of the committee today, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My apologies for being late and then being in and out. We had some armed services meetings and some interviews with nominees and voting, so back and forth. Welcome, Mr. Vought. Nice to have you here. Is that you? No.
I can't tell. It's been all hearing.
As a senator who's on appropriation and also on the authorizing committee of armed services, I can attest that the budget justification documents that provide us with the granular program level information, they are immensely important to building these annual bills. Congress has been waiting over 4 months for the department's budget justification books. Fiscal year 2026, it starts in just 3 months. The budget information provided to Congress for the Department of Defense, sir, which accounts for over half of all discretionary spending. So far, that amounts to just a table of contents. It is not helpful. These delays by OMB have impeded our work on our annual bills and complicated our ability to deliver timely funding for fiscal year 2026. Going forward, I hope that you and your team will work with us and communicate more clearly so that we can work together, so that we can get the information needed from you, and so that we can work on our responsibilities and better serve the American people. I look forward to doing that.
Absolutely, Senator. We are working very diligently to clear as many congressional justifications as we possibly can. I get a daily update on this right now. I assure you it's not all OMB. We are working expeditiously to get this thing up to you as much as we possibly can.
Great, because we're going to be starting our NDAA work on armed services very, very soon, and it would be helpful as an authorizing committee to be able to have information. Now I'm also going to talk to you about rural radio and the emergency alerts that we get on that. You've heard from a number of my colleagues about the issues they have on the emergency alerts, on the tribal needs that many of us have in our states with that. But I am very concerned also about the emergency alerts that come to many places in Nebraska only through that rural radio. We're a state of vastness, very sparsely populated areas that don't receive cell service in many cases. It's difficult even with landlines in many areas of my state. Would you also commit to working with me to figure out if we are going to need some replacements for this, so that all Americans, no matter where they live, will be able to have access to these alerts? I know you committed to work on the tribal issues, but I am also concerned about emergency alerts.
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you, sir. I would hope that we can figure out who's going to carry out those responsibilities if these stations end up being shuttered. As the administration decided on the proposed rescissions, can you walk us through OMB's consultations with the State Department and also with the Department of Defense, specifically on preventing China, which this administration rightly considers our pacing threat, from exploiting any gaps that may occur due to those rescissions? How did you do it?
Thank you for the question, Senator. You know, we worked in close collaboration with the State Department on this, with the Department of Government Efficiency. Originally, this was pure waste, fraud, and abuse, with basically no policy reductions. Where you see the policy reductions are in things like World Health Organization, some of the international organizations that we fund that are both voluntary and assessed. And so whatever you see is, the example is, we have over an annualized basis, we've identified waste and abuse and things that are actively harming our foreign policy. This would do nothing to impact our ability to respond to our adversaries.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I would just ask for one more question. Thank you. I believe that we need to have constructive reorganization of our federal agencies. I believe that we must have good stewardship of taxpayer dollars. However, I have had outreach from a number of Nebraska law enforcement about a proposed transfer of the HIDA funding to the Justice Department. And they're concerned that a transfer of those funds would undermine their very important efforts that they use those funds for with Drug Task Force and their regional task forces to counter that drug trafficking. I've seen firsthand how important this funding is, especially in the panhandle of Nebraska. Have you consulted with any state or local law enforcement about that recommendation from OMB, and have you heard concerns from constituents like mine?
Senator, we have not heard concerns. I can go back and double check and to the extent to which we had stakeholder involvement as we crafted that budget. Again, it's a shift to a department that does grant making. And so we've had a long concern to the extent to which the EOP is in the grant-making business, that it probably doesn't have the skills to do that. So we don't really view this as in any way reducing our support for law enforcement at all. That's a common theme throughout our budget. But I will go back and check on our stakeholder engagement on that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Ossoff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Mr. Vought. A lot of mistakes getting made in federal personnel management. Hundreds of National Nuclear Security Administration employees, those are the folks, as I think you know, who safeguard America's fissile material, fired. You had to scramble to hire them back for obvious reasons. That was a mistake, right?
Senator, I'm here on behalf of a rescissions package.
Well, you're here to answer questions that senators want to ask you. It was a mistake to fire hundreds of people responsible for the safety of America's nuclear stockpile, and a mistake that you had to remedy by scrambling to rehire them. It's okay to acknowledge mistakes, Mr. Vought.
I think those questions are better posed to the agency heads that
But
made
I'm posing
decisions.
it to you, Mr. Vought.
Again,
Was it a
I'm here
mistake?
I'm here to testify on the decisions that I've been a part of and to send.
You're the budget director.
The rescissions package.
You're the
that-
budget director. Was it a
Aware. I am
mistake
aware of
to
that.
fire hundreds of people responsible for safeguarding America's nuclear stockpile? It was, because the administration had to scramble to rehire them, right? It was a mistake.
Senator, the
You fixed it.
administration went through a very extensive Department of Government Efficiency process that was very dynamic. Cabinet heads were making the final determinations, and they made adjustments where they felt they needed to.
Was it?
But I'm going to let
what
them
about
explain those decisions.
Hundreds of Food and Drug Administration medical device reviewers and food safety reviewers fired, I guess accidentally, and then rehired. A mistake, right?
I'm going to let the cabinet secretaries explain the decisions and what was going on. I don't have the information to give you a sense of the granularity of every one of those decisions.
Were you not aware, for example, until this hearing, that the nuclear safety workforce had been gutted and then that decision had to be reversed? Is this the first you're hearing about that?
Senator, I'm aware of many things and the extent to which the
asking if you-
Department
this
of Government
isn't-
Efficiency
it's not-
was involved with a lot of work to make sure that we were operating government as efficiently as is possible.
Okay. You know what
And
would be,
the extent to
what
which
would be very simple is just, yes, that was a mistake to fire hundreds of people responsible for safeguarding America's nuclear stockpile. Take credit for fixing the mistake. Hundreds of National Weather Service employees fired, scrambling to rehire them. It's a mistake. I met, Mr. Vought, a gentleman in Georgia about a month and a half ago whose son is an astrophysicist, recently trained by an elite U.S. university. I mean, these are the folks that we really need serving the American people, who had just been hired by the federal government and was summarily terminated, not on the basis of any individualized determination about his performance, but simply because he was a probationary employee who is now working in Beijing. You guys are making mistakes, and I want to focus on the mistakes that you're making at the CDC. Have you visited the CDC, Mr. Vought, by chance?
I have not.
It is the flagship epidemiological and public health agency for the country and indeed for the world.
That even the
as you
Biden
know.
administration felt the
And
need to
you have
reform.
you have now fired or tried to fire nearly a quarter of the workforce, correct?
Senator, are you suggesting the CDC performed well in the last pandemic?
I asked you whether you have fired or tried to fire a quarter of the CDC
I
workforce.
can't answer the question because I
Okay,
don't
well,
have
you
the facts in front of me. That's
You
the
have
CDC
fired or
director's,
tried to fire
information to give
nearly
you.
a quarter of the CDC workforce, and your budget request for FY26 would cut the CDC budget in more than half, correct?
The Center for Disease
No,
Control was
answer the
in-
question.
They were incompetent.
Answer the question, Mr.
last
Vought.
pandemic.
Does your
The
budget
Biden- we
request
certainly cut
seek to cut by more than half the CDC budget?
We certainly seek to cut and reduce
By
the
more than
CDC.
half the CDC budget.
The
Listen,
extent to
Mr. Vought,
which-
you need to come to Georgia and visit the
Happy to.
CDC. Good. We'll make that happen because you are destroying this institution. And whatever criticism you have about their past performance, they are essential to public health and epidemiological defense in the United States. You're crushing morale, you're crushing capability, and you're destroying my constituents' lives. And I am grateful for the commitment you've made to come to Georgia and visit the CDC and sit down with those employees. Thank you,
Senator,
Madam
the Biden
Chair.
administration
I don't want to
proposed
hear about the
reform.
Biden
Well, they
administration.
did.
You're here on behalf of the Trump administration.
The witness is allowed to answer the question. The time, however, has expired, but would you like 30 seconds to answer the question?
I would just point out, Senator, that the Biden administration thought the need to put forward a reform proposal because of the performance of CDC in their performance in the global pandemic of COVID. The CDC can be and should be reformed. Our budget reflects that. I look forward to coming to Georgia to visit CDC.
I look forward to your visit.
Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Chair Collins and Vice Chair Murray. I want to echo something that my colleagues have talked a lot about. Like many members on the Appropriations Committee, I work with Democrats and Republicans alike and work hard on bipartisan compromises my entire Senate career. I serve on the Armed Services Committee, I serve on the Intel Committee, I serve on the Special Committee on Aging, all deeply bipartisan committees. I asked to be joined to this committee because it had a history of bipartisanship, of Democrats and Republicans looking across the country at our constituents and saying, of all the tax dollars you send to Washington, what is most important to you? You just heard from Senator Ossoff. The CDC is vital to his state. It's vital to all of us because it protects us from disease. But we ask our members of Congress to listen to their constituents through town halls, through town meetings, through just normal interactions about what resources they need spent. But what this rescission package is you are taking away the job of elected representatives to make the judgments in the Appropriations Committee about where federal dollars should go. It's literally upending the role that Congress has as the power of the purse. And it's deeply disturbing because it means the fundamental requests of our constituents can't be implemented. I've seen it in many things I've worked on, simple things like the Cyber Academy to make sure our best and brightest come work for the federal government in our intelligence services, in the DOD. And we say to these young people, we will pay for your education if you serve. Well, these hiring freezes and these cuts in funding mean that none of these kids who have already gone through the training program can't get hired. We see it in the funding cuts for cybersecurity. So when we just are concerned about foreign adversaries hacking our elections and we hire people at Homeland Security and we hire people at the FBI and we hire people at the DOD and they all get fired, it undermines congressional will. We sit in hearings all day long learning specifics about national security, about food security, about health and human well-being. And then we make sure when we decide where resources should go, that that's the best judgment. And we do it on a bipartisan basis, always. We have always done this on a bipartisan basis. So you could understand why people are so distressed about this rescission package because it takes away the job that our constituents have asked us, not you, to do. So with that, I want to turn to some of the specific cuts. I have many, many areas of interest.
Can I
but
respond to that, Senator?
Yes, go ahead.
This bill gives you the vote to pass or not pass the rescissions package. They're not taking anything away from you. In the same way the Congressional Budget Act says that appropriations bills should be started and done by a certain period of time, it outlines the Impoundment Control Act that allows you to vote for it or not vote for it.
That's an absurdity. It's an absolute absurdity because that's not the way it's supposed to work. You, as the administration, is not supposed to pick and choose the work that we've already done. We have the power of the purse. I will be voting no on this rescissions package. It's the most obvious no vote that my constituents would like me to make. And I don't know why more Republicans aren't standing up to President Trump and these very ill-advised decisions he's making, because it's harming their constituents. It's harming the people they represent. So when they choose to vote yes on this rescissions package, woe be to them for their constituents, because their constituents will be the first in line to tell them how they've been harmed. So I'm going to ask you for just a few pieces of area where this rescission package is going to be deeply, deeply felt. Let's look at national security. The rescissions package rescinds $1.65 billion in funding for the Economic Support Fund, which provides U.S. economic assistance that promotes cooperation, coexistence, and border regional integration initiatives that align with the objectives of the Abraham Accords and U.S. strategic interests. Given U.S. strategic and global interests in this region, how do you assess the impact of these cuts on the stability of Israel's neighbor and the broader Abraham Accords framework?
It will have no impact on the Abraham Accords. It will have no impact on Israel. It will have an impact on $4 million for sedentary migrants in Colombia, $300,000 for an NGO to hold a pride parade in Lesotho, $3 million for Iraqi Sesame Street, on and on, with that particular rescission that you were referring to.
I don't believe that's true. In fact, the purpose of the Abraham Accords investment is to make sure that we do economic growth with the support of Israel in Arab countries. And you are undermining that by eliminating $1.65 billion. And the three things you just mentioned do not add up to $1.65 billion. Let's look at global assistance and development. The proposed rescission package will cut economic development assistance and funding for multiple accounts. How does gutting these programs enhance American influence, beat back Chinese influence, the Belt and Road Initiative that projects their power worldwide, and ensure that Americans win hearts and minds globally?
Well, Senator, we just covered economic assistance. Let's cover development assistance. $6.2 million to address the needs of Venezuela migrants in Colombia, $6 million for net zero cities in Mexico, $4.4 million for low emissions energy in Vietnam. Again, with every single one of these
So when you're not investing in energy in Vietnam, do you know who does? Russia. Russia has its agents all across Vietnam. You know who else? China. So when they project their power worldwide, it makes us less safe. Let's do biosurveillance and global health.
The senator's time has expired.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I will submit these questions for the record.
Thank you. Director Vought, I know it's been a long afternoon for you. I hope that the questions that you have heard today have helped give you a better understanding of the depth of concerns about this rescission from members on both sides of the aisle. I do want to reiterate a point that I made in my opening statement, and that is that this committee works with administrations all the time on rescissions, which we put into our appropriations bills. We also do reprogrammings that have to be approved by the subcommittee's chair and ranking member in both the House and the Senate. But we recognize that the budget and our appropriations bills are not static. What is unusual here is to have a rescission sent up without consultation with the committee that applies to funding that was in the continuing resolution, which the president signed into law. And again, the legitimate examples that you have given today of wasteful and unnecessary spending are from the Biden administration. They are not from this administration. So I hope that you will work more closely with our committee. I do appreciate your being here today and answering questions and giving us a better idea of what is the rationale for some of the cuts, even though I think there's still some very profound disagreements. I now want to recognize Vice Chair Murray for any closing remarks that she may have.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Collins, for holding this hearing. This really is an important discussion with really enormous stakes for our communities, with local news that they rely on, whether they'll go dark, for the world. Will America keep its commitments and continue leading on the global stage? And for this committee, will we keep focused on bipartisan funding bills, or will we give that up to spend our time on a wave of partisan rescissions? I've made really clear where I stand. I want us to keep working together to write bipartisan bills that allow us to be a strong voice for our constituents. That's going to prove very difficult and maybe even impossible if this body goes down the path Trump is now calling for, a path that would let partisan rescissions rip up our bipartisan agreements. So I hope my colleagues will join me in rejecting this destructive request outright and ensuring decisions about what we fund and even potential rescissions are made by us through the annual appropriations process. Thank you very much.
The hearing record will remain open for 1 week for senators who wish to submit additional questions or other statements for the record. So the record will be open until Wednesday, July 2nd at 6 p.m. This hearing is now adjourned.